Before the first spark of fire, before bones, blood, or breath, something else governed this world. It was not humans, nor even the gods. Civilizations so strange and ancient that their ruins are written in myths, madness, and the dark space between stars. This is not history. It is the nightmare of prehistory. Welcome to the most terrifying civilizations that existed before humanity. If humanity came first. If you are still here, please don't forget to subscribe. We go beyond what the textbooks dare. And since you are, leave a comment. From what part of the world are you watching? And what time is it for you? Midnight? 3 a.m.? The witching hour always knows who's listening. Lemuria. Imagine a world without people. Without humans, cities, or internet rabbit holes at 3 a.m. Only silence. The wind on stone. The ocean dew on a volcanic coast. And then something moves. They say Luria existed before the Nile sculpted its meandering path. Before the Himalayas raised their icy fangs to the sky, even before the idea of humanity spread in a dream, Lemuria existed, a lost continent swallowed by sea. It was not a myth for those who needed it to be real. A memory, a warning, a whisper beneath the tides. This is the story of a civilization that we never should have found. Not because it was forgotten, but because it ensured it was never remembered. The name Lemuria did not arise for the first time in ancient parchments or mystical visions, but from an error. In the 19th century, zoologists wondered about the distribution of lemurs in Madagascar and the India Wall regions, without anything obvious to connect them. They theorized about a lost land bridge, Lemuria, a vast continent that disappeared uniting Africa and Asia. The theory was disproved before it even saw light. But the word remained. Esoteric thinkers seized on it. Spiritualists, occultists, theosophists, all those who had a taste for cosmic drama and forbidden history clung to Luria like a dog with a bone. Helena Blavatsky, the high priestess of theosophy, described Lemuria as an ancient cradle of prehuman life, not only ancient, but prehistoric in the truest sense, pre-physical, vibrating in a dimension of proto-consciousness. You know, the usual. According to these arcane accounts, the Lamrians were not human. Not exactly. They were immense, towering beings between 35 and 45 meters tall, with translucent skin and psychic abilities. Their eyes were large and luminous. They communicated telepathically. They had no bones. And yes, some versions say they reproduced by laying eggs. Let that sink in. They lived in an era before death, sin, before time began. Lemuria was Eden, but with more lava. Its capitals shone with crystals that were not only decorative, but conscious. The architecture buzzed, the trees spoke, the animals transmitted messages between conscious species, and then they fell. But how? In one version of the story, the Lemurians simply evolved upward, ascending to a higher plane and leaving behind only their echoes and eggshells. In another, more deliciously tragic variant, they were raised by a cataclysm. The earth cracked, volcanoes roared, oceans rose, the sky turned black, and Lemuria sank kilometer by kilometer into the ungrateful sea. Its crystal towers went out one by one. The cities disappeared beneath the tsunamis. Entire populations vanished without trace. It was not just a flood. It was an oblivion, an erasure. The memory of Lemuria was not only erased, but there's a problem with being thorough. Sometimes, what you erase tries to return. The stories of Lemuria do not remain in the theosophical libraries. They spread outwards, bleeding into the mythologies of Polynesia, Tamil Nadu, Easter Island, and the interior of Australia. In southern India, legends speak of Kumari Kandama, a sunken land ruled by ancient Tamil kings, swallowed by the ocean. In Hawaii, there are tales of Mu, a homeland that sounds suspiciously like Lemuria's lost twin. Across the continents, cultures with no connection whisper the same fear, that something vast, luminous, and terrible once lived where only water flows. Now, this is where it gets disturbing. Some modern mystics claim that the Lemurians have not left. They have only moved. Now, they live underground in crystalline cities under Mount Shasta in California. That's right. According to believers, this quiet peak in Northern California is the gateway to an ancient Lemurian underground metropolis. Locals report sightings of tall figures wrapped in robes gliding silently through the forest without leaving footprints. Some even say they have been invited in. The place has become a magnet for New Age pilgrims, UFO hunters, and conspiracy theorists with too much free time and little internet. Are they crazy? Sure. But are they wrong? That depends on what you are willing to believe about time. Let's talk about terror. Not the terror that makes you jump in fright. Of existential terror. The idea of Lemuria is not scary because it's strange. It is scary because it rewrites everything. If Lemuria existed, really existed, then the timeline we rely on would be a lie. Civilization did not begin with Sumer, Egypt, or the Indus Valley. It began long before we were able to remember it, long before we could even be considered us. That is not just rewriting history. It is rewriting humanity. It also suggests that intelligent civilization is not the pinnacle of evolution, but a cycle, a boom and a fall, a flame that burns until it drowns. And that we are not the first. If the Lemurians existed and were so advanced, where did they go? Why is there no evidence? No bones, no tools, no ruins? Because Lemuria was not just a place. It was a civilization built on principles that we do not even understand. On energy instead of matter, on intention instead of physics. The proof is not lacking. It is incompatible. They say Lemuria's technology was crystalline, vibratory, organic. That all of its society was structured around balance with Earth's natural resonance. Imagine a smartphone of quartz that grows from ground like fruit. Imagine cities that flourish, not are built. Now imagine what happens when tectonic plates move and sea swallows all. Nothing breaks. It simply fades away. You cannot unearth Lemuria. You cannot scan it. You can only feel the replica in your dreams, in your fears, in the persistent and painful suspicion that something existed before you and was better. But better does not mean benevolent. Now comes the paranoia. Certain corners of the internet insist that the Lemurians did not disappear out of pity or misfortune. They were purged. By whom? It depends on the hole you get into. Some say Atlantis did it, an ancient rivalry that turned into a war of massive psychic destruction. Others say that aliens annihilated them to restart the evolutionary clock of Earth. Clean slate. Try again. But the darkest version is simpler. They destroyed themselves. Lemuria did not fall because of its arrogance, but because of its imbalance. Its mastery of nature became exploitation. Harmony became dominion. The crystals broke. The energies turned against them. They did not collapse from the outside, but from the inside. Does it sound familiar to you? Now imagine this. What if some of them survived? Not as bodies, but as ideas embedded in our DNA, sleeping in our dreams, glimpsed in the hallucinations of the dying. What if civilization does not invent itself, but remembers? That is the terror of Lemuria. It is not that it failed, but that it continues to haunt the plane of our species like a virus, waiting for the moment when we are advanced enough to remember what we forgot. Or even worse, repeat it. Because here is the crux of the matter. In many versions of the myth, Lemuria is not the first civilization on Earth. It is only the first that fell. Which leads us to wonder, who came before? It's time to delve deeper. Because if Lemuria was terrifying in its fall, the next civilization makes it look amateur in the apocalypse. And it lived in an ocean so vast, so deep, so empty, that we have not yet found its remains. Armu. Before the continents existed, there were kingdoms. Kingdoms that were not drawn on maps, but sewn into the seams of Earth itself. Vast kingdoms that did not need borders, because they were the borders that floated through the tectonic plates like ghosts. Before Lemuria became a legend, there was something more, something bigger, something older, something that looked at Lemuria as an extinct dinosaur might look at a confused little child and say, "Are you new here, right?" That was Mu. It was not a continent, nor an island, but a world. And then it vanished. Not with an explosion, not even a whisper, with a silence so complete, so surgically clean it rewrote the ocean. Where Lemuria whispered from the mountain tops and the crystal cities, Mu screamed from the depths of the Pacific. Or at least that's what it used to do, because that is where the believers say it was a colossal mass of land that extended from Hawaii to Easter Island and Fiji, forming an ancient empire of astonishing proportions. According to the doctrine of James Churchward, retired British colonel, engineer, and accidental prophet, Mu was the mother country of all civilizations. At the beginning of the 20th century, Churchward claimed to have discovered some ancient Nakal tablets in India, texts so old they made Sumerian cuneiform writing look like high school graffiti. The Nakal described a divine, peaceful people with engineering knowledge so advanced that it seemed impossible. The Muvians, or people of Mu, were master architects, scientists, and metaphysicians. They could fly, they could teleport, they could bend energy like we bend metal. Their temples rose like grown coral reefs, not built but grown. Their palaces buzzed with anti-gravity. Their gardens glowed in the dark. Churchward was not only describing a civilization. He was presenting a species that had completed evolution and then drowned. Why? Choose the version you prefer. Some say that Mu sank beneath the waves after a series of volcanic eruptions, and the entire continent was dragged screaming into the Earth's molten lungs. Others insist that it was a karmic collapse, punishment for arrogance. But the spiciest version is that Mu was not a victim. Mu was a test, a consciousness experiment that went wrong. Let's go back. According to the broadest interpretations, Mu was not even originally from Earth. It was a seeding point, a kind of planetary beta test carried out by cosmic engineers. Call them gods, aliens, programmers, or whatever you like best. The Muvians were avatars of pure intention. Consciousness was downloaded into biological vessels placed on Earth to guide it toward consciousness. It worked for a while, but then stopped. The people of Mu began to fracture. Some aligned with harmony, others with domination. Some sought to ascend to Earth's vibratory plane, others wanted to control it. The unity cracked, the frequency descended, the balance broke, and the Pacific opened its jaws. The entire civilization fell into the shot. Only buildings and cities remained. But the idea of Mu, a large-scale elimination event, did not disappear. The ocean became its tombstone, the silence its only memorial. Except not entirely. You see, unlike Lemuria, which left whispers behind, Mu left anomalies behind. Easter Island, the Bimini Road, the large-scale elimination event. The ocean became its tombstone, the silence its only memorial. Except not entirely. You see, unlike Lemuria, which left whispers behind, Mu left anomalies. Easter Island, the Bimini Road, the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, an underwater structure with suspiciously clean angles and a megalithic geometry that no one can explain. Are these the bones of Mu? Maybe. Or maybe they're just footnotes, faulty translations of a lost language that we were never meant to speak. Because here's the trick of Mu. It is not terrifying just because it disappeared. It is terrifying because it could still be here, right below us, under the waves. Because if Mu was a civilization based on energy, as mystics claim, its infrastructure would not decompose. It would transform, it would recode, it would disappear into dimensions that we cannot measure. In that model, MW did not sink. It faded away. Every time we fly over the Pacific, we walk on its ruins, without being aware that under us lies a city of forgotten gods humming just outside our frequency range. That is the horror of MW. You cannot escape because perhaps you are already inside. Let's talk about scale. Church claimed that MW had a population of 64 million inhabitants. That is more than the Roman Empire at its peak. Imagine a civilization so large and powerful disappearing in a single geological sigh. No tombs, no cities, just salt water and pressure. How do you erase 64 million people? Simple. You make sure that no one believes they existed. Church's claims were dismissed. Conventional science branded them fanciful. His tablets a hoax. And perhaps they were, but the myth refuses to die because Deep down, we long for what was before. The unprovable gives better nightmares. And here comes the part that will keep you awake tonight. According to some esoteric models, MW not only preceded Lemuria, but created it. Lemuria was a splinter colony, a refuge, a desperate attempt to save what was left when the central core of Mu began failing. The Lemurians were Muvios with their serial numbers erased. They inherited the technology. They inherited the fall, which means that Mu was not the first civilization either. It was the second. There was something even more ancient, something even more terrifying, something that saw Mu emerge, saw it fall, and took note. If we follow this trail more deeply, MW begins to seem less like a civilization and more like an archetype, a cosmic software error that reinstalls itself under different names. Atlantis, Shambhala, Hyperia. Again and again, the cycle turns. Utopia, arrogance, collapse, rinse, repeat. Mu is terrifying, not because it died, but because it died correctly. He followed the plan. He pressed the reset button, and now we are just the next line of code. But if MW is still here, if there are still fragments of that knowledge, then it is not only ancient, but active. Let's imagine for a moment that certain elements of Mu's consciousness have survived. Not in temples, nor in stone heads, nor in buried machines, but in people. What if some of us carried genetic echoes of the muletan traits, latent memories, an instinctive knowledge of technologies that we cannot explain? Have you ever met someone who seems older than they should be? As if they remembered things they never learned. Yes, MW calls them. It calls us all, eventually, in dreams, in symbols, in obsessions that we cannot place. Because if Mu was a civilization of consciousness, then its resurrection needs no bricks or plans. It only requires faith. Faith is the door. Consciousness is the key. The nightmare is this. What if Mu has not disappeared? What if it is restarting? If your brain remains intact after that descent to Mu, hit the subscribe button. This has only just begun. Tell us in the comments. For where do you follow us? And what time is it now? Because with stories so old, time may not be as solid as you think. Atlantis. You already know the name Atlantis. The syllables resonate like a drumbeat from the bottom of a lost ocean. The most famous lost civilization in human memory. The myth is so great that it has surpassed its original story. Atlantis did not simply disappear. It became a mirror. Each era, each empire, each culture that considered itself special looked at the myth of Atlantis and saw its own reflection. Glorious, tragic, doomed. But Atlantis is not a fairy tale. It is a warning, and we continue to ignore it. Supposedly, it all began with Plato in the year 360 BC. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he described a land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what today we call the Strait of Gibraltar, larger than Libya and Asia together. A marvel of agriculture, politics, architecture, and technology. The Atlanteans were strong, ambitious, and rich. They had it all: gold, elephants, chariots, fresh water, and fertile plains. Cities built in concentric circles of land and water. Towers made of white, black, and red stone. Temples covered in orichalcum, a mysterious metal only surpassed by gold. But Atlantis was not only rich. It was organized, militarized. Its society was a well-oiled machine that worked thanks to divine lineage in a cold, systematic domain. It was not a paradise. It was precision. And precision breaks in a beautiful way when enough pressure is applied. The story goes that, as Atlantis grew, so did its ego. The gods gave them everything, and they asked for more. They sought conquest. They waged wars. Their divine spark went out. The moral of Plato's story is simple. Athens, symbol of virtue, defeated Atlantis, symbol of decadence. And the gods, who watched how this decadence unfolded, pressed the delete key. In a single day and night, all civilization disappeared under the sea. End of story. Except that was never the end. Atlantis broke free from its leash, because Plato's metaphor touched a sensitive fiber. Something deeper, something older. Civilizations do not simply disappear from history. They resonate. Atlantis became the echo chamber of our greatest fears and grandest fantasies. It became the question mark at the end of our cultural map. What if we aren't the first? For some, Atlantis was just a philosophical fable with a moral. But for other spiritualists, esoteric historians, and speculative archaeologists, it became a model for something real. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, claimed in the 20th century that Atlantis was not only real, but technologically superior to what we have built today. Cayce's Atlanteans had death rays, anti-gravity planes, and energy crystals that powered entire cities. They created hybrid creatures through genetic engineering. They mastered the art of manipulating the climate and matter with thought. They lived in a world more like Dune than Bronze Age Greece. And here comes the blood-chilling part. If any of that is true, how could something like that be lost? How can a civilization so advanced that it made the pyramids look like Fisher-Price projects disappear without a trace? Simple. By making sure it is. Atlantis was not just a civilization. It was an experiment. Some believe it was never meant to last. According to the esoteric canon, Atlantis did not arise on its own. It was founded by beings from other worlds, from higher dimensions, or from whatever lies beyond the limits of human understanding. Some say these founders were divine. Others say they were just earlier versions of intelligence, bored with their own perfection. They gave humanity or pre-humanity a gift box with forbidden toys, energy crystals, computers encoded with souls, psychic artificial intelligence. We opened the box, and it exploded. The fall of Atlantis was not a war or mistake. It was a chain failure, an empire that played God without reading the manual. According to tradition, two main factions formed: the children of the Law of One and the children of Bile. The former believed in harmony, spiritual evolution, and service to others. The latter believed in power, control, and service to themselves. They did not clash with swords, but with ideologies backed by technology on a planetary scale. The Law of One tried to maintain balance. The children of Bale crossed the line. They created hybrid life forms, some for war, others for work, and others simply to see what they were capable of. They built towers that grazed the sky, devices that could manipulate tectonic fields. The Atlanteans could reshape DNA with resonant frequencies, build sensitive machines, and move objects with sound. Their civilization was a living song, and a wrong note broke the Earth's crust. Some versions suggest that Atlantis not only fell, but imploded. A vibratory collapse, like hitting the wrong frequency on a wine glass the size of a continent. Some say the high priest tried to stabilize it, but the central system had already failed. The network collapsed, the sea rose, and the civilization that once controlled climate drowned in its own storm. And if you think that's crazy, imagine a version in which it was intentional. Certain versions of the story insist that the Atlanteans knew just what they were doing, that their leaders, seeing the imminent imbalance, reached a decision, not to fight, not to flee, but to sink themselves as if in a race against time before it fell into wrong hands. Imagine the psychological weight of such a thing. An entire culture that decides to self-destruct so the future won't inherit its mistakes. Atlantis did not fall. It sacrificed itself, though not entirely. Some say that there were survivors. Not many, but the righteous. They scattered through Egypt, South America, and the high places that would not flood. They carried fragments of technology, runes, maps, the memory of how not to burn the world. And perhaps that memory became distorted, rewritten. Perhaps what we call civilization is just Atlantis repeating itself. New names, new faces, the same plot. Because if their knowledge survived, so did their curse. We build, we rise, we touch the sky, and then everything burns again and again. Atlantis is terrifying because it suggests collapse isn't a system error. It is the system. It is the necessary endpoint of uncontrolled growth. Is progress dark symmetry? But here is where it gets even colder. Atlantis wasn't even the oldest. Plato's account suggests it was already ancient when it fell, that its roots went back thousands of years before his account, that it remembered even older things. Because Atlantis did not emerge from nothing. It came from something earlier, something to the north, beyond time, beyond decay, beyond fire or floods, a place of light, stillness, a land called Hyperborea. Hyperborea. There's a place older than maps, older than myths, a land that was never conquered, never corrupted, not even really lost because it was never part of world. Its name slips like frost from the most ancient tongues. Hyperborea. Say it aloud. It sounds like breath on glass, a whisper in cold. Unlike Atlantis, which drowned in its ambition, or Mu, which dissolved in silence, Hyperborea simply waited. It did not fall. It did not fight. It floated somewhere between memory and emptiness, a fixed point outside the ruinous cycle of time. It is the place that should not exist, but that has always existed. According to the Greeks, Hyperborea was far to the north, beyond the Scythians, beyond the realms of snow and reindeer, beyond the limit of the cold world, a place where the sun never set, where the winds did not howl, where life was not lived, but endured with effortless peace. The Hyperboreans, they said, lived for 1,000 years. They knew no war, nor disease, nor need. Their gods walked among them, not as tyrants, but as kin. It was said that Apollo himself disappeared there for his sabbatical, escaping the noise of Olympus to enjoy his eternal summer. But this is not a snowy Eden. It is something more disturbing, something that feels wrong. Because Hyperia was not only idyllic, it was intact. Even in a world plagued by death and decay, it remained intact. Without tragedies, without entropy. A perfectly balanced system that never changed, never evolved, never moved. Imagine it. A civilization that did not fall because it had no need. It was born in perfection. And perfection is a kind of horror. Because anything so perfect does not need you. It does not need anything. If Lemuria was mystical and little technological, and Atlantis apocalyptic, Hyperia is something completely different. Immutable, the absolute zero of civilization, a place frozen not in ice, but in concept. It is not surprising that the ancient Greeks feared as much as they venerated it, and nevertheless, it could not let it go. They spoke of it in contradictory terms, hidden but radiant, cold but warm, isolated but central to all myths. It was said that the Hyperoreos sent sacred offerings to Delhi wrapped in mysterious gifts through a chain of intermediaries that began in a place that no one could point out on a map. Their songs were known, their symbols imitated, but their faces never seen. Which raises a real question. Did Hyperia ever exist on this earth? Or is it something else? Let's enter the realm of metaphysics. Some esoteric traditions, those. Delicious alleys of the human imagination where metaphysics, mysticism, and a pinch of the theory of ancient astronauts coexist, paint Hyperia not as a mass of physical land, but as a state of being, a frequency, a plane of existence that briefly intersected with ours and then faded like a dream that cannot be fully remembered. For these thinkers, the Hyperboreans were not human or even pre-human, but primordial intelligences. Consciences so refined, so elemental, that they no longer needed technology or form. They were civilization in its final form. They were not builders or warriors or scientists, but witnesses, entities that had seen the rise and fall of countless worlds and had decided to withdraw from the cycle. That is the true terror of Hyperia. It did not fail. It simply decided not to participate. He looked at existence, the fire and blood of growth, the endless cycle of birth and death, and said, "No, thank you." And then it disappeared. But not entirely. In the secret stories, the hidden books with covers made of silence, there are rumors that the Hyperboreans left echoes, not monuments or texts, but resonances, a kind of vibratory DNA embedded in certain places. Mountain peaks, stone circles, glacial valleys, places where time folds on itself, places where the air becomes too silent, places where your spine tells you to walk backwards. They say the poles, do you remember? They say that the auroras are fingerprints. They say that when the ice sings at night, Hyperia is humming in dreams. And maybe that's just a myth. But maybe the myth is what happens when the truth is too cold to touch. There's another point of view, a darker one. Some versions of the myth suggest that Hyperia was not simply separated from the world. It was a model for this, a prototype, a perfect civilization created first and tested, then archived when it turned out to be incompatible. Think of it. What if Hyperborea was the original model, the first societal attempt? Not ours, nor MW, nor Atlantis. But this one, a civilization built on design, not evolution. Without hunger, suffering, chaos, only order. What if that was the problem? Imagine a system so perfect, so inflexible, that it could not adapt, could not feel, could not break. The perfect garden, but without a serpent, without an apple, without exile, only infinite stillness. Of those that drive you crazy. So maybe Hyperia never left. Maybe it was abandoned, archived on the hard drive of the universe as a failed iteration, the favorite toy of a dead god. That version of the story ends this way. The Hyperboreans knew what was coming. The slow fading, the entropy from stagnation. And so, in their last moments, they codified a seed, not in stone or songs, but in us. An instinct, a distant attraction to the poles, to the unknown, to silence. You have felt it. The desire to disappear, to escape chaos and live in perfect stillness. That is not fantasy. It is memory, Hyperborean memory. And some say it is calling us back. Now, let's discuss structure. Hyperia has always been beyond geography, culture, time. Some esoteric maps do not even bother placing it in the Arctic. They place it in the center of a polar vortex, surrounded by 4 rivers and guarded by elemental forces, a cosmic North Pole. What if the North Pole were a multidimensional prison of consciousness in Nazi occult mythology? Yes, this is where things get weird, even for fringe history. Hyperia was considered the ancestral homeland of a divine race, a kind of Aryan Atlantis predating all other civilizations. We're not going to delve into that topic here. And let's be very clear, none of that is based, in fact, but is worth pointing out how the myth of Hyperia has been distorted to adapt it to whatever ideology the original story needed. It is adaptable in a terrifying way, because that is what makes Hyperia so dangerous as a concept. It says nothing. It absorbs everything. It is a blank canvas carved from ice. You can write whatever you want on it. Utopia, dystopia, alien advance, divine origin. It will accept it because silence does not argue. Stillness does not contradict. That is the horror of Hyperia. It is not that it has been lost, but that it does not care if we ever find it again. So what happened to it? Some say that it simply moved on, ascended to a higher dimension, collapsing into its own metaphysical reality. Others claim that it is still there under the Antarctic ice, hidden under the polar crust, with its cities preserved in perfect hibernation, waiting for the stars to realign. Others insist that the Hyperboreans never left because they were never really here. They were and are observers, astral topographers, cosmic archivists who marked the potential of the Earth, and then archived it too soon. And maybe that is why we keep talking about it. Because something in us knows that there was a first civilization, a perfect civilization, from which we do not come, but which we failed to become. Lemuria fell because it was too weak. MW fell because it was too vast. Atlantis fell because it was too proud. But Hyperborea did not fall. It stopped, which is much worse. Because everything that stops can resume. And the last thing we want to hear on the edge of history is the sound of steps on the ice. But don't worry, the next civilization did not freeze. It hid in the depths of mountains, in cities of light, guarded by monks who remember things that never made it into books. It is called Shambhala. Shambhala, deep in the Himalayas, beyond ridges of snow and stone, beyond what your map says is real, there's a place not on earth but within it. A city that shines like a golden prayer. A kingdom not of politics or power, but vibration. Shambhala is not found. It finds you. And if it does, you're already changing. Unlike Lemuria, which was born of intuition, or Atlantis, which drowned in its own splendor, Shambhala is something quieter, older, perhaps smarter. It is definitely not a civilization as we know it. Shambhala is not about scale. It is not about control. It has to do with the preservation of knowledge, the spirit, the sacred code underlying reality. You want to understand it as a city with streets, towers, a population. But you can't because Shambhala is a mentality disguised as myth hidden in a mountain. According to Tibetan Buddhist and Hindu traditions, Shambhala is a pure land, an enlightened kingdom nestled in a remote, inaccessible area of Inner Asia, a place where wisdom rules, peace is permanent, and suffering is not only healed but obsolete. Its citizens, if they can be called that, are enlightened beings, not in a metaphorical but literal sense. They walk without touching ground. Their speech is music. Their thoughts are architecture. Their silence is more eloquent than any language you know. But here is the most surprising thing. Shambhala is not the future. It is the memory of what came before. The teachings say that Shambhala predates human civilization, not in centuries, but in cycles, yugas, eons. It was the seat of a civilization that did not fall, flee, or evolve. It hid. It turned away from history when it began to go wrong. When the world became cruel, Shambhala became invisible. And it is still there, under the snow, behind the veil, watching and waiting. But not for us. Let's talk about architecture. Not of bricks and beams, but vibratory geometry. Esoteric accounts describe Shambhala as structured like a mandala of perfect symmetry, a city designed as a diagram of the cosmos. Each street is a mantra, each building a sutra in stone. It is said that the city throbs with inner light, not the illumination of lamps or stars, but the light of understanding, consciousness turned into physics. In Shambhala, one does not see, one understands. The city is ruled by a line of kings, the Kulkis. But forget your image of Game of Thrones. They are not rulers in any traditional sense. They are guardians, librarians of destiny. It is said that each Kalki has the keys to time. When the time comes that the world is too immersed in chaos, it is predicted the last Kalki will rise, leading a luminous army from Shambhala to restore the timeline. You have heard it quite well. Shambhala not only hides, but prepares. Think of it like a seed locked in time. When corruption on earth reaches its peak, when darkness no longer has a name because it has become the background, radiation of life, Shambhala will open up. Not as a war, rather a correction. But that is only the poetic version, safest, most terrifying. It has already happened, and we missed it. In more esoteric models, Shambhala is not a fixed place, but a transdimensional zone of consciousness, a city-state of minds that have learned to free themselves from linear reality. One does not travel to Shambhala by foot or with a map. You don't have to climb any mountain to get there. One ascends from within. That is the danger of Shambhala. It cannot be conquered. It cannot be stolen. Because the moment you try, you disqualify yourself. Only those who are pure in heart or mind, or in whatever frequency purity actually operates, can approach its doors. But purity in this context isn't moral, it's resonant. You either fit the key or you don't. And if you try faking it, you disappear. Not figuratively, like when people go searching for Shambhala and are never seen again. They disappear into fog, into wind, into a sound that is never resolved. They were not punished. They were filtered. Shambhala is a firewall coated with illumination. Now comes the strange part. Yes, some traditions place Shambhala within the Himalayas. Others place it inside Earth. Others insist that it exists on a completely different plane, which occasionally intersects with ours during rare astronomical alignments, like a spiritual eclipse. Some accounts, modern, marginal, and not conducive to sanity, suggest that Shambhala is not terrestrial at all, that it is an alien outpost, or rather that its citizens are us from a different timeline. A version of humanity that made the right decisions, that resolved war, cured hunger, balanced technology and spirit, and then decided to hide from the rest of us until we figure things out too. They are not judging. They are waiting. Some say they still send messages, small nudges, a dream here, a revelation there. The influence of Shambhala isn't in events. It is in people, in flashes of genius that arise from nowhere, in art that seems too great to have been painted by any human hand, in the moment of peace that is felt in the middle of a disaster for no reason. That is Shambhala. It does not intervene, it only remembers. But let's get darker, because every light casts a shadow, in the middle of a disaster for no apparent reason. That is Shambhala. It does not intervene, it only remembers. But let's be more pessimistic, because every light casts a shadow. If Shambhala is real, if it is a hidden civilization that never fell, never wavered, never appeared in a satellite photo, then we have to ask ourselves, why? Why hide? Why not intervene? Why let the world burn while they meditate in their crystal temple? Because maybe, just maybe, they have already seen all of this before. Maybe they understand something that we do not. That interference makes things even worse. That civilizations are not destined to last forever. That every boom carries within it the seed of its own destruction. And if that seed is uprooted, everything collapses anyway. Maybe they are not observing. Maybe they're studying us like a petri dish under spiritual observation. That is the existential horror of Shambhala. It is not absent because it does not care. It is absent because it knows more. You want them to be saviors. Perhaps they're scientists or, even worse, historians documenting our collapse with dispassionate compassion. And yet, there is another thread, a warmer one. More difficult to believe, easier to hope. Some legends say that Shambhala is not passive, that the last caliph, the final king of the invisible empire, has already been born and is waiting, that there is a clock ticking under the mountains. And when the last cycle reaches total corruption, he will come out on horseback, not with armies, but with the truth, with a sound, a word, a frequency that will undo the lie of the world, and from it something clean will be born. Not a civilization, but a restart. But for now, we are not prepared. So the doors remain closed, and the wind whispers stories, and the mountains keep their secret, and Shambhala dreams under the snow, radiant and calm, and full of knowledge too heavy for our bones. Do you want to know the scariest thing? Shambhala does not need to win because it already has. It exists in a higher octave, one in which failure is impossible, where pain is a fact, not a wound, where history is a myth that is told to children who have forgotten what they are. Shambhala is not waiting for us to get up. We are waiting to remember that we fell. And when we do, the doors will open. But not all doors lead upwards. Some lead inward and others downward. Because if Shambhala is the city of light, then its shadow waits below. In the hollow, in the darkness, in the place under the skin of the earth, where the forgotten kings dream and the ancient engines hum. Agartha, Agartha, under your feet, far below the subway lines and the fossil deposits and the caverns full of magma, there's another world. A world within the world. A city under all the cities, deeper than myth, older than the ruins. It has names, many names, but one has endured more than most. One slips through the tongue like a secret remembered in a dream. Agartha. This is where the earth opens and reality folds in on itself, where the maps bleed at the edges, where the surface world is noisy, fragile, overexposed, just the crust of a much older cake. If Shambhala was the beacon from above, the high-frequency utopia that hid behind the illumination and the cloud cover, then Agartha is the echo from below, the kingdom of what came before, the city that sank inward instead of outward. A spiral, a uterus, a sanctuary, a warning. Agartha is the most terrifying civilization that has existed before humanity. Not for what it did, but because it's still doing it right now under your feet. Let's begin with the central idea. Agartha is the capital of inner earth, not in a metaphorical or spiritual sense, but literally. Imagine a vast network of tunnels, chambers, and bioluminescent cities under the planet's surface. A hidden world with its own ecosystems, climatic systems, and civilizations. Not caves, not ruins, but entire cultures that continue to function, evolve, wait, or observe. The inhabitants, that depends on whom you ask. Some say they are survivors of Lemuria or Atlantis who fled underground during ancient cataclysms and never emerged again. Others claim that they are a completely different race, created before or parallel to humans, that lives undisturbed by time or tides. They are not extraterrestrials, but neither terrestrial. Perhaps they look like humans, or perhaps they do not. The descriptions vary greatly. Some say they are tall, radiant beings with elongated skulls and luminous eyes. Others speak of reptilian lords, ancient automatons, telepathic monks, or beings made completely of light and intention. One account claims that the Agarthians do not speak at all. They communicate through harmonic resonance, a kind of musical telepathy in which each thought is a chord and each phrase a symphony. We're not talking about fairy tales. We are talking about an entire civilization beneath civilization, not metaphorically under our history. Literally. Here is the scary part. Agartha did not fall. It did not burn. It did not drown. It withdrew. It moved inward, away from the surface world's madness. It looked at the noise, the greed, the rising tides of war and empire and said, "Enough." So it retreated, sealed its doors, and became a legend, but not a myth, because legends leave traces. From the ancient Sanskrit epics that describe vast underground cities like Patala and Bhogavati, passing through the Buddhist tradition about tunnel systems that extend from Tibet to Mongolia, to the fantastic stories of an ant people that sheltered surface tribes during the purifying fire. Agartha lives in the cracks between cultures. It whispers in all mythologies. It is glimpsed in every deep breath of folklore. Even modern history has not avoided stumbling upon it. In the early 20th century, some explorers claim to have found entrances in the Himalayas, the Andes, and Antarctica. Rumors of Nazi expeditions in search of the master civilization under the pole. Russian mystics digging in search of the root of all knowledge. American pilots who supposedly disappeared over the poles and reported vast green lands under the ice. Ridiculous, maybe, but what if all those stories point to the same thing? Not to a place, but to a threshold. Agartha, as it is often described, is not a single city, but a network. Imagine a network of vast underground corridors connecting different civilizations, some extinct, others hidden, and others completely alien to us. In the center of everything, the capital, the pulse, sometimes called Shambhala, the lesser or telos, or simply the inner light. It is here where they say the records are kept. All of them. Every event that has happened, every thought that has been thought. Agartha is not just a city. It is a server, a backup of existence protected by beings who no longer sleep because they do not need to. They remember everything and have been waiting. Then, what do the Agarthans want? It depends on the state of mind of the myth. In some versions, they are caretakers, custodians of the earth, who silently drive human development from afar. In others, they are more interventionist. They guide, influence, even kidnap when necessary. Some stories suggest they are neutral observers, interested in balance, not the result. But then there are the darker versions, the ones that claim that Agartha is not hiding from us. It protects itself from us because humanity is the invasive species, the virus, the anomaly. And the Agarthans are only quarantining the problem. That is the terrifying thing, isn't it? That there is a civilization below us, so superior to us, not only in technology or spirituality, but in patience, in scale. That they have been here all this time listening, recording, watching us bang our heads against the same damn walls of empire and ego century after century. And all this time they are deciding if we are worthy, if we are safe. Some say that there are surface inhabitants who arrive there accidentally or otherwise. Pilots, hikers, monks. Most never return. Those who do are different. They don't talk much. They don't sleep well. They say things like, "The air down there is alive." Or, "I saw cities of sound." They don't tell stories. They leave warnings and then shut up. Others claim that there are access points, portals, hidden entrances in remote mountains, under deep oceans, under certain temples and sanctuaries. They're not doors in the traditional sense, but vibratory doors. If your mind is tuned and your body clean enough, you will pass without realizing it. You will enter a cave and never leave. But you will not be lost. You will be archived. Let's broaden our perspective. If Agartha exists, if it is real in any meaningful sense, then the history of humanity changes because it means we're not the cusp, nor the beginning, nor the end. We are the noise in the middle, the error in the simulation, the superficial failure of a deeper, older architecture. We are the newest tenants of a very old building, and the owners live in the basement. So, what happens when they come upstairs? What happens when they decide to reclaim the rental agreement? Some believe that it has already begun. UFO sightings are increasing. There are strange seismic activities. The poles are melting. There are rumors of deep drilling that find things that repel. But Agartha is not coming to save us. It comes to assess the damage. And perhaps, if it decides that the surface is irreparable, it will not clean the earth. It will simply close the doors. And wait, that is the most terrifying idea of all. That Agartha is not ancient technology, nor a myth, nor fantasy. It is a protocol, the Earth's integrated security system, a civilization designed not to guide us, but to survive us. And so it waits under the feet of the cities, under the skin of the continents, a world under the world, a mirror turned down, a vault of memory and judgment. And when the time comes, when the experiment up here finally breaks forever, Agartha will emerge, not to punish, nor to rule, but to continue. Because down there, civilization did not end. It never stopped, and they remember everything. But if Agartha protects the earth from within, the next civilization protects something even deeper. It is not a city, nor even a species. They are the rules. You already know them. You have read their stories. You've heard their names. The ancient race. The ancient race. Before language, before the concept of civilization had even crystallized into stone and symbols. Before the stars were gods, and the gods were names, and the names were power. Before there was anything that could be called before, they were already here. Not observing, building, or inhabiting. They are called the ancient race. But that is only because our vocabulary falters at what they really were. They are not a race or people. They are a category of beings. Creatures of an age and structure so deep that calling them ancient completely misses the point. Time is not something they left behind. Time is something they invented and then grew bored of. They were not from Lemuria. They did not emigrate from you. They did not ascend from Atlantis or drill up from Agartha. All that were superficial accidents, echoes of a deeper pattern. The ancient race was the pattern, the proto-civilization underlying all civilizations, so immeasurably ancient that its ruins became the foundation of myth itself. And in the oldest corners of the earth, under the ice platforms of Antarctica, in the deepest oceanic trenches, behind the eyelids of prophets and madmen, they're still there, waiting, or even worse, waking up. Let's Lovecraft for a moment. H.P. Lovecraft did not invent the ancient race, but he gave us a template, a terrifying silhouette. His fiction speaks of cosmic entities that came to Earth before life itself developed, shaping its destiny like children scribbling on the walls of a nursery. The great race of Yith, which could transfer its consciousness through time. The ancient beings, cephalopod-like entities with starfish heads and barrel-shaped bodies, who built the first cities even before mammals were conceived. They were not demons. They were not gods. They were the first. They created, cataloged, collapsed, and then stayed very, very still. Because for them survival did not mean reproduction or conquest. It meant retreating. Like Agartha, like Shambhala, like everything truly advanced, they knew when to leave. Only they did not leave. They sealed it. According to the deepest and most fragmented texts, those that were transmitted through secret societies, those that were codified in sacred geometry and lost languages. The ancient race did not die. It was inverted. Their consciousness folded inward, escaping time like a snake shedding its skin. Their cities are not ruins. They are traps, prisons made of concepts and gravity. They are not explored. They are activated. Because the ancient race did not build monuments to last. They built alarms. Have you ever noticed that the oldest things on Earth are also the most incomprehensible? The stone spheres of Costa Rica, the underwater roads near Japan, the huge, misaligned magnetic anomalies at the poles. We can explain them. Erosion, seismic changes, optical illusions. But what if these are intentional? What if they're glyphs? Warning labels? What if someone or something long before humans were even relevant left notes for themselves, and we've been reading them backwards? Let's discuss biology. You can't. Not in any meaningful way. The ancient race was not humanoid, nor terrestrial. The few descriptive fragments that have survived in different cultures speak of cephalopod limbs, multi-lobed eyes, radial symmetry, crystalline nerves, an image that does not correspond to carbon-based life forms. They were not alive as we understand life. They were not dead as we understand death. They simply existed. Imagine an organism that does not breathe, eat, or sleep, but remembers things that have not yet happened, that builds cities in higher dimensions and lets them bleed down into our reality, like leaks in the ceiling, that sees time not as a river, but as clay to mold. Now imagine that this organism does not like what it sees in us, not out of cruelty, but because to them we are a contamination, a failure, the flesh of a failed system. They did not create us, but they could be here to end us. The scariest thing is that they could have before. Some esoteric thinkers who delve too deeply into the mythical strata propose that the ancient race is the cause of the periodic restarts in the history of the Earth, not natural disasters, nor divine judgment, nor maintenance, nor a security mechanism. Once the surface gets too noisy, the monkeys build nuclear weapons and shout their ideologies to the sky. The alarm sounds and the deep things stir, not quickly, nor with anger, but with elegance. Floods that erase every trace of the empire. Plagues that rewrite genetic memory. Geological events so finely tuned that entire civilizations disappear without a single bone out of place. That is the specialty of the ancient race, not chaos. Silence. They don't destroy. They clean. Of course, a fringe theory holds that some of the most advanced structures left by human civilizations were not built for humans, but by accident. Unconscious mimicry. The pyramids, Stonehenge, Göbekli. Structures aligned not with the stars, but with ancient geometries buried in the earth. That we're building things that call to the ancient race, echoing their structures, repeating their symbols, and that, eventually, they will respond. Not because they want to, but because we rang the bell. The problem is that you cannot fight them. You can't even understand them. The ancient race does not appear as monsters, ships, or beings. It appears as events, coincidences, time loops, blackouts, a shadow in your childhood memories that does not belong to anyone you've known. Sometimes they present as thoughts, ideas, whispered dreams shared between cultures without contact, symbols carved in stone by hands that did not know what they drew. The moment you think of them, they're already in you. That is the question. The ancient race isn't an invasion. It is a download, and we are the storage medium. So what is the end? Maybe nothing. Maybe we're background noise for them. Or perhaps we are an experiment, a test organism. Perhaps they planted us here to see how long consciousness takes to devour itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, when we reach that final moment in which the surface is a wasteland of light and ashes, they will open their vaults, they will slide back into the world like a hand in a forgotten glove and start again with something better. No more vault, only more aligned. Because the ancient race does not value life, it values continuity. And we, unfortunately, do not meet the requirements. But here is a twist. Not all of the ancient race left. Some stayed. Not in bodies, not even in form, in structures, in dreams, in genes. The myths of gods with too many eyes, of beings that arrive from the stars and teach, and then disappear, are not metaphors. They are memories. And the scariest thing of all is that the ancient race did not become extinct. They only changed shape and are still among us. Or perhaps like us, which means that we are not just the descendants of monkeys who got lucky. We are the slow mutation of something much older, something that waits to remember what it once was. And when we do, it will not be progress. It will be a reset, because if the ancient race awakens in us, what comes next will not be a future. It will be the return of something that the earth tried to forget with all its might. But that is not the deepest heresy. There is another myth, one that claims that humanity did not even belong in this place, that we were second attempt, that before Adam breathed for the first time, there were others. They were not animals nor spirits, but something in between, and they were erased. The pre-Adamites, the pre-Adamite peoples. Long before the gardens, before the dust formed man, before the serpent unfurled into a story, and before the human being had any meaning, there was another creation, a version 1, a test. A civilization that looked at the universe with other eyes, moved through the world with other bones, and understood everything that we would later forget. They are called the pre-Adamites. They were not angels, nor demons, nor animals, nor gods. Something in between. Something terrifying in its intermediation. Because if the stories are true and extend through the Gnostic texts, the apocryphal scriptures, esoteric Islam, mystical Christianity, and beyond, then humanity was not the beginning. We were the replacement. And those who came before did not disappear in a burst of divine anger. They were eliminated, erased so completely that even their memory had to be disinfected. But traces remain in the stories, in the shadows, in the way our own myths seem like sequels to something we never read. Immerse yourself in that lost prologue. Start with the Gnostics, the first Christian sects that believed that the world was not created by a benevolent God, but by an inferior and defective being, the demiurge. In their cosmology, before the creation of Adam, there were other beings, older, more perfect, formed not from mud, but from light and will, souls without wrapping, spirits dressed in proto-adder. These were the Priamites, sensitive, intelligent, and free. Perhaps too free because they did not serve. They knew. In the Gnostic story, knowledge is a sin only when it is not yours. So the demiurge, unable to control these first prototypes, dispersed them, fragmented them through the dimensions, and locked their memories in the DNA of the world. And then he tried again with Adam. This time more fragile, easier to manipulate, easier to shame. But perfection cannot be buried without leaving traces. That is the first terror of the Priamites, that we are built in the image and likeness of something forgotten, not by time, but by design. In esoteric Islamic writings, we find similar rumors that, before Adam was created, God made other intelligent beings, entire nations of them. They lived, they ruled, they rebelled. The earth was theirs, and they destroyed it. So they were expelled, and the jinn were scattered through invisible kingdoms, while humanity was granted a new world, clean of its previous tenets. But perhaps not all the tenets left. Some versions claim that the Priamites were not completely destroyed, that some survived, that they still walk among us. Not as monsters, nor as ghosts, as echoes, as the indescribable wisdom in a child's eyes, as a dream that seems like a memory, as the ancient city that no one admits exists. They say that some humans carry Padamite blood, that our genius, our madness, our relentless obsession with divinity does not come from a divine spark, but from the remains of something more ancient and terrible than we can understand. It is not only ancestry, it is inheritance. Let's talk about geography, because the Padamite theory does not live only in dusty writings. It tries to resurface through the bones of Earth. In Antarctica, the blank space at the bottom of the world. Some theorists insist that we can find the remains of a lost pre-human civilization. Ruins buried under 3 kilometers of ice. Satellite anomalies. Radar signals that do not belong in this place. What if Antarctica was not always a frozen wasteland? What if at some point it had been warm, habitable, and inhabited? Some believe that it was the last refuge of the Priamites, a last bastion locked in ice by whatever force decided that humanity deserved a fresh start. But you never start from scratch, do you? Because ice does not erase. It preserves. And maybe, just maybe, there are things under the glaciers that remember too much. Then there are the skulls, the elongated ones found in Peru, Egypt, Malta, dismissed by conventional science as rituals of cranial deformation, cosmetic modeling. But what if that is not the whole story? What if the reason some ancient peoples tried to imitate the elongated skulls was because they were trying to look like someone real? As if the rulers who preceded the Padamites were not us. They didn't even look like us. They were taller, stranger, more in tune with something deeper, not better in a moral sense, but optimized, designed, a species that did not evolve but was installed and then uninstalled when the system collapsed. But what if the system did not collapse? Collapsed? What if they collapsed it? There is a current of Thoth mysticism, half paranoid, that says that the pre-atomic ones were exterminated because they threatened the architects of reality. Not God, nor the gods, but something else. Something older that they were learning too fast, breaking the laws, crossing the limits, becoming what they should never have been. So the flood came, or the fire, or the silence. It always comes back to the same thing, to the purifying event. But it was not something natural. It was surgical, and humanity re-emerged from the ashes, not as a successor, but as a containment measure. That is the horror of the Priamites. They suggest that we are not the heirs of glory. We are the reboot, the degraded sequel, the species designed not to resurface, but to forget. And maybe that's why we're obsessed with ancient civilizations, why we pursue lost continents and forgotten temples. Because somewhere inside us, the panatomic memory still stirs. A phantom itch, the sensation that we knew something before and then it was taken from us. Who did it? What does it matter? What matters is the shape of loss. Because the pre-atomic civilization was not only intelligent, it was integrated, psychic, planetary. They did not build technology. They were technology. Consciousness interfaces. Minds that moved matter. Cities that dreamed their own architecture. And then, one day, the dreams ended because someone pulled the plug and rewrote the operating system. Us. But systems fail. And sometimes the old code leaks. That's why some places seem older than they should. That's why certain rituals open doors that we should never find. That's why the same symbols appear in cultures that never met. The pre-atomics did not die. They disconnected. And their frequency still exists in our DNA, in our stories, in the static between thoughts. So, what happens when we retune? When the signal gets stronger? When the veil thins and the old world presses against the membrane of the new? What happens when the pre-atomics decide they want to return? Not as rulers, nor as saviors, only as occupants. Because this was their house, and we have rented it badly. The idea that we are not the first, but the second, is already disturbing. But what if we are not even the second? What if the pre-atomics were also late? What if they replaced something even older, even stranger? Something that was not born on Earth? Because the next civilization was not only ancient. It flew. It continues with us after the Potomacs. You are braver than most. If your third eye has not closed in protest, subscribe and tell us from where you see us and what time it is. Midnight in New York, dawn in Nairobi. Whatever time it is, these ancestral echoes always arrive on time. Vimanas, everything begins with fire. Not the one that burns wood or cities, but the one that bends gravity. A crackling crown of impossible force, humming with the sound of equations that no human ear could decipher. Light that moves incorrectly. Shapes that should not stay together. And then it rises. A flying machine, a chariot, a weapon, a city, a god. It depends on who is telling the story. In the ancient Sanskrit epics of India, these vehicles are called Vimanas. They flew, they fought, they shone with the light of 100 suns. They made the skies tremble. And if just one word of all this is true, they not only changed the definition of ancient civilization, they erased it. Because the Vimanas are not relics of human history. They are artifacts of something prior to humans, and they could be returning. The first descriptions of the Vimanas appear in texts such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, epics older than Rome, older than Greece, even older than some of the oldest myths that we consider fundamental. In them, gods and heroes plow the skies in vast aerial palaces, not metaphorical, but literal flying machines. Vehicles made of gleaming metal, propelled by unknown energies, capable of moving between cities, continents, and even planets. But it is the details that are disturbing, because the texts do not describe vague celestial platforms. They describe technology, engines, levers, ducts, weapons that disintegrate armies, shields that repel projectiles. Does it sound familiar? It is said that a Vimana rises with the roar of a lion. Another moves like a comet through the sky. They maneuver at impossible angles. Some shine with a blue color. Others radiate fire. Some disappear completely to reappear kilometers away. This is not poetry. It is a logbook. And whoever wrote, it was not inventing. He was registering. Let's reflect on this for a moment. If these machines really existed, then the civilization that built them was not only advanced, it was unimaginably advanced. We're not talking about rudimentary gliders or hot air balloons. These are vehicles that defy gravity and operate according to principles that we still cannot reproduce. Anti-gravity, electromagnetic propulsion, dimensional folding. The Vimanas were not flying machines. They were violations of physics, of history, of what we believe is possible. And they were not rare. The texts describe fleets of them, squadrons, strategic deployments, wars fought not with swords, but with directed energy weapons, rays of light that reduced cities to ashes, bright shields that blocked radiation, ground troops equipped with armor and devices that look more like exosuits and railguns than Bronze Age tools. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. It should, because the Mahabharata not only describes these machines, it describes how they were used. In one passage, a warrior unleashes a weapon that annihilates thousands instantly. The earth becomes barren. Hair and nails fall from the bodies. Birds fall from the sky. The river dries up. The earth shines. Does it sound familiar? It should. That is radiation poisoning. That is radioactive rain thousands of years before Hiroshima. What are we seeing here? A metaphor or a memory? Perhaps ancient authors saw shadows of something far older. Perhaps they inherited fragments of a story that didn't begin with them. A war that destroyed the sky. A civilization that wielded stellar fire like a hammer, then broke everything, including itself. Because that is the true story of the Vimanas, not the flight but the fall. The civilization that built these machines, whether human, pre-human, or alien, was annihilated. Not by enemies, not by escalation, nor by its own impulse. The same story again. MW, Atlantis, Leoria, and now Vimanas. Technology becomes transcendence. Transcendence becomes arrogance. And arrogance becomes ashes. You might think we would have learned. We have not. And maybe we shouldn't. Because if the Vimana civilization existed, its remains would still be here. Not in obvious places, not in museums, but in buried cities, molten metal, anomalous radiation zones, underground chambers sealed with stones too thick to break. Perhaps even in vaults under temples guarded by rituals, not locks. And perhaps, just perhaps, someone has already found them. Some believe Mana technology did not disappear. It was hidden, transmitted in fragments, encoded in mantras, protected by lineages of sages who knew what this knowledge could do in the wrong hands. Part of it, they say, reached secret societies, ancient orders, the hands of those who whisper about free energy and zero-point propulsion, not as science fiction, but as classified research. And if that sounds paranoid, ask yourself this. Why do so many cultures throughout so many eras speak of flying machines, not of dreams, but machines? Why do all the important myths have flying chariots? Why? As above, so below, does it resonate in all sacred geometry, in every esoteric plane? Because the sky was not a mystery. It was a battlefield, and the scars are still there. You just have to dig deep enough. Sometimes literally. Let's delve deeper. What kind of civilization builds Vimanas? One that is not limited by the logic of life on the surface. One that thinks of space not as a void, but as infrastructure. A civilization that does not worship the stars, but uses them. Some theorists suggest that the Vimana civilization was not terrestrial, that it arrived here or crashed, that the Vimanas were escape pods, exploration ships, emergency technology used by a dying species trying to terraform a wild world, and, in doing so, left traces in our myths, our genes, our religions. Because if the Vimanas came from the stars and their pilots mixed with the first humans, then the gods of yesteryear were never gods. They were survivors, and we are their echo. Deluded, forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, starting to remember. That is the real danger of the Vimanas, not the machines, but memory. Because once you remember something, you want it back. We are already trying in laboratories, in secret projects, in forbidden sciences that have no peer review or morality. We want anti-gravity. We want unlimited power. We want to open the Vimana and steal its fire. We want to fly, but the Vimana does not care because the last time it flew, the world caught fire. And we keep rummaging through ashes. But if the Vimanas are relics of something prior to humanity, then we have to ask ourselves, who were the pilots? Where did they go? Did they die or change? Because the next civilization cannot fly. It does not fall. It simply exists. Perfect, timeless, untouchable. The Golden Age. The Golden Age begins not with an explosion nor with a whisper, but with a sigh. A long, slow exhalation from the world's lungs. The trees are taller. The rivers run clean. The sky is not something you look at. It is something you are part of. There are no wars, no poverty, no kings, no borders, no words for hunger, fear, or property. Civilization exists, but not as buildings, cities, or machines. It is not something built, it is something lived. This is the Golden Age. But do not trust yourself, because this era, this perfect pre-Apsirian world, is not remembered for how it was lived. It is remembered for how it ended. And the fact that almost all the civilizations that came after clung to its memory tells you one thing. It was not a myth. It was a memory so traumatic in its loss, so luminous in its absence, that the very idea of utopia throughout history is shaped by pain. Because the Golden Age was not just a paradise. It was our home, and we were exiled. Let's start with a common thread. The Greek, Hindu, Zoroastrian, Nordic, Mayan, Chinese, and even Australian Aboriginal mythologies speak of a time when the world was in perfect harmony. When the earth itself was a benevolent mother, not a battlefield. When humans saw whatever we were, we lived without tools, without laws, without hierarchies. Everything necessary was provided. The fruit fell from the trees. The water was clean. The animals were docile. Death was a whisper, not a scream. The Greeks called it the Age of Kronos, when Kronos ruled before Zeus. There was no work, no pain. People lived like gods. And when they died, they became spirits of the earth, not bones in the earth. In Hindu cosmology, it is the Satya Yuga, the first and purest of the four great ages. An era in which virtue was not taught, but embodied. When humanity was united in a single truth. When consciousness itself vibrated in perfect alignment with the cosmic order. And then the wheel turned. Kronos was dethroned. The Satya Yuga dissolved into Trada. Purity was diluted. Truth became law. The law became punishment. Punishment became the engine of history. In all the myths, the Golden Age ends, not slowly but suddenly. And the subsequent silence was so profound that it resonated through the ages. The Golden Age as a civilization is terrifying, not because it was lost, but because it worked. It presents a version of intelligence that did not need fire, stone, or flight to prosper. It did not invent cities. It did not need them. It was a civilization of presence, of attunement. Imagine a species so synchronized with its environment that it never had to conquer it. Without agriculture, without property, only existence as sustenance. They did not need tools. They were the tool. It was not about the simplicity of hunter-gatherers. It was an advanced simplicity of the type that is only reached when complexity is overcome and one reaches the other side. It was not naivete. It was mastery, a way of life that made fear obsolete and need irrelevant. And that is why the Golden Age left no ruins, bones, or ashes, only stories. Because harmony does not leave scars, only silence. So what happened? If this world was so perfect, what broke it? It depends on the mythology you follow. In some, it is pride. In others, knowledge. In many, it is not a fall of angels, but of alignment, a slip, an inclination. Something changes at a cosmic or moral level, and the world stops being in balance. The earth cools or heats up. People forget how to talk to animals. The fruit stops falling. Blood appears. The fall in so many traditions is not only a moral event. It is vibratory, a cosmic misstep that throws the entire system off. And suddenly, paradise stops being paradise. It is history. This is where things get dark. Because if the Golden Age really existed, and if it was the predetermined state of life on Earth as we know it, it is not a record of progress. It is a record of decline, a slow spiral that moves away from perfection. Each invention is a compensation. Each empire is a bandage on a wound that we no longer remember receiving. We did not emerge from mud. We fell from the light. And since then we have been crawling to return. That is the true horror of the Golden Age. It suggests that we did not evolve towards civilization. We involuted towards it. And the civilization that we have now is not our triumph. It is our scar. But here comes the really disturbing thing. Some traditions say that the Golden Age never left. That it is still here, parallel, hidden, intertwined with our world, like a song that sounds under the static of modern life. We can no longer hear it, not clearly, but sometimes we feel it. That strange sensation of peace in certain forests, the inexplicable comfort of running water, the feeling of déjà vu when reading myths we've never studied. What if these are not accidents? What if they are echoes, reminders? The Golden Age is not a place. It is a frequency, and we are the static. Some esoteric thinkers say that the beings of the Golden Age did not die. They changed state, ascended, changed dimension, became gods, spirits of nature, superior beings to whom we pray now. Or maybe not all made the leap. Perhaps some decided to fall, stay behind, walk with us as memories, as myths, as poorly translated folklore. And perhaps we call them fairies, goblins, geniuses. Perhaps all the other kingdoms of myths are just fragments of the Golden Age, preserved like amber amid chaos. Still warm, still breathing, still waiting. So what can we conclude? The Golden Age was not lost to war, greed, or sin. It was lost by entropy, by time, by the inevitable decay that occurs when trying to maintain perfection in a world built for fluctuation. But here is the final twist. What if the Golden Age wasn't the first? What if it was the last attempt? A desperate restart after MW, Atlantis, and Lemuria crashed and burned? A final version of civilization built not on technology, but on resonance. And when it failed, when even perfect simplicity cracked under the weight of cosmic drift, the Earth was left only with fragments. A shattered utopia, a dream we all try to remember. But we cannot, because the next civilization was not a dream. It was a mutation, scaled, ancient, intelligent, and scaly. A species that was not born from myth, but perhaps was its origin. Dinosaurian civilizations. Dinosaurian civilizations. It is the most ridiculous idea you've ever heard. Of those that make you laugh at conferences and prohibit you from entering museums. Dinosaurs, those clumsy and brainless beasts of prehistoric imagination, running cities, building tools, developing languages, perhaps even launching rockets. Absurd, right? But why? Why is it absurd? Why is it more absurd than hairy and anxious apes building the internet? Why is it so easy to believe in alien civilizations on distant planets, but laugh at the idea that the Earth, in all its 4,500 million years of history, has only once been lucky enough to develop intelligence? This is the truth. The timeline of life on Earth is so long that it exceeds the capacity of the mind. The entire existence of humanity, the rise of agriculture, the pyramids, the Second World War, everything has happened in the last seconds of the Earth's metaphorical calendar. The dinosaurs had 165 million years. We have had perhaps 300,000. So, if intelligence is the natural endpoint of evolution, why do we assume that we were the first? This is the thesis of the dinosaurian civilization theory, that long before us, long before mammals, long before fire, language, or even the oceans as we know them, something else existed. Something reptilian, something intelligent, something civilized, and it disappeared. Not without leaving a trace, but with traces that we cannot recognize. Let's get the obvious objections out of the way. Where are the ruins? Where are the tools, the cities, the roads? Why don't we find fossilized iPhones in the Triassic stratum? The answer, as horrible as it may be, is time itself. Time doesn't just bury things. It turns them to dust. Fossils are rare, incredibly rare. They require perfect conditions. A quick burial, little oxygen, mineral substitution. Most organisms do not fossilize. Most structures degrade. Even the most resistant buildings that we have built would disappear under natural erosion in less than 1,000,000 years. Concrete crumbles. Metal rusts. Plastic melts. Skyscrapers disappear in 10,000 years. Now multiply that by 60 million. What would remain? Neither steel nor glass, but stone, perhaps bones, and, if you pay attention, perhaps something that does not quite fit. There have been anomalies. There have always been anomalies. Fossils with strange wear patterns. Formations that look suspiciously geometrically planned. Stones shaped like tools dismissed as natural footprints where they shouldn't be. They are marginal artifacts dismissed as false because the alternative is too uncomfortable. That something intelligent lived before us and left a message in the rock, in the genes, in the fear that humans have always had of reptiles, even without ever having seen one. What does that fear arise from? Why are all mythological monsters reptiles? Why are our gods snakes? Our demons have forked tongues. Our dragons are wise and ancient, and always a little too intelligent. Because maybe they're not metaphors, maybe they're memories. Let's be specific. The theoretical candidate for this ancient intelligence is often called saurians or dinosaurs, a hypothetical branch of the true fanged dinosaurs. The troodontids were small, bipedal, with prehensile hands and unusually large brains for their size. They had binocular vision. They walked upright. They had social structures. Does it sound familiar? If evolution had continued uninterrupted, if the asteroid had not hit, some paleontologists believe that the true dontids could have become increasingly intelligent, more upright, more dexterous, more like us. The concept of dinosaur is often presented as a thought experiment. A feathered reptile with forward-facing eyes, 3-fingered hands, a huge brain, and the posture of a human. Critics laugh, but mathematics do not lie. Evolution is not a straight line, but intelligence has evolved multiple times on Earth. Crows, octopuses, dolphins, elephants. So why not reptiles? What if they didn't just evolve? What if they flourished? This is where the horror comes in. Imagine a civilization millions of years old. A people who built without metal, perhaps. That carved in stone, not wood. That he worked with biomaterials, resin, shells, bones, and obsidian. That he did not create empires with skyscrapers, but extensive underground worlds, cities and caves, fortresses and cliffs, societies that left no pyramids but patterns. Patterns that we still cannot interpret because they did not write with ink or chisel in Latin. They left behind ecosystems, domesticated flora, modified soil layers, chemical traces in the strata, things that we mistake for natural changes because we don't know what to look for. What if the asteroid wasn't an accident? Some radical theories suggest that it was not random. What if the impact that wiped out the dinosaurs was not a coincidence, but a sacrifice? A last effort by the Serranos to prevent something worse. Something that they themselves had unleashed, a weapon, a virus, a machine. Maybe they tried to escape. Maybe they fled underground or off the planet. Maybe they died, leaving behind only enough of their history to become our monsters. Or maybe they survived and are still here, hidden in the depths of the earth. Sleeping reptilian gods, watching us, waiting, not as allies, but as predecessors. In the same way that you watch a younger brother drive the car that you built, hoping he doesn't crash it, knowing that he will. Look around you. Our stories are plagued with lizards. Dragons in China, Nagas in India, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, the serpent of Eden, scales, eyes, fire, wisdom. Why do all ancient cultures fear and venerate the same thing? Perhaps because they remember not as individuals, but as a species that carries within it the memory of a time before time, of teachers who became tyrants, of architects who fell not because they were evil, but because intelligence devoid of empathy devours itself. Maybe we are not just the successors of the apes. Maybe we are the rebound of the reptiles, a course correction, a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, those who preceded us left warnings in the myths, in the symbols, in the silence. So what happened to them? The Serranos, the dinosaurs. Did they hide underground? Did they become legends? Or did they become us? A recessive gene, a mental pattern, cold logic, the instinct for survival, the strange way we kill, not only to eat but to win. Maybe the ancient reptiles did not go extinct. Maybe they downloaded themselves. And now we wear them like a mask, without knowing where the mask ends or if it really ends. But if they disappeared, if the asteroid was a total reset, then we must ask ourselves, was there something before us? Or are these stories just projections? Myths that pretend to be memories? Let's prove it. Because the next civilization left no bones, no bodies, only stones. Stones too big, too heavy, too old. Built by hands whose existence no one can prove. The megalithic builders. Megalithic builders. Stone. That's all we have. No words, no bones, no parchments, no accounts, no broken ceramics. Only stone. Blocks the size of buses. Slabs weighing hundreds of tons. Perfectly cut, smooth, fitted without mortar, aligned with stars, buried in mountains, engraved in landscapes, so old that the earth has begun to forget they were not always there. The megaliths. Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Stonehenge, Pumapunku, Nanmadol, Easter Island, the hypogeum of Halsaflini, the Oerian. Structures so old that history stumbles upon them. So complex that archaeology pretends they are more recent. Because if they are not, if they really are what they seem, then we were not the first ones. And those who came before us did not build only with stone. They spoke through it. The megalithic builders were not quite human. At least, not like us. They may have looked like us. They may have walked upright, stared at the stars, died with their heads tilted towards the sky. But they were different. Their minds worked on different scales. Their time was slower. Their goals were more difficult to understand. They did not conquer nature. They harmonized with it. Not because they were spiritual, because they understood it. And they sculpted that understanding into rocks so heavy that no one has moved them since. Not without cranes. Not without theories. Not without excuses. Let's start with physics. The trilithon of Baalbek in Lebanon. 3 stones, each weighing approximately 800 tons, carved, moved, and placed in position with precision. Today, we cannot replicate it with conventional means. The largest stone ever extracted, still half buried in the nearby earth, weighs over 1,000 tons. The ancient Romans built on these stones centuries later, because even they did not know how to move them. The blue stones of Stonehenge were dragged more than 240 kilometers from Wales to their current location, and then placed in an upright position in astronomically aligned formations that follow the solstices with astonishing precision. Pumapunku, in Bolivia, has interlocking H-shaped blocks so precisely cut that they might well have been machine-carved, except that they predate metal tools. The builders disappeared a long time ago. Their tools disappeared. Their writing did not exist. Their bones turned to dust. All that remains is stone. But that is the point. They were not trying to tell us their names. They were trying to tell us the shape of time. Modern archaeology insists that these structures were built by early human beings using nothing more than ropes, sleds, brute force, and decades of work. That is the official story. But here's the problem. It just does not seem right. The deeper you go, the more complicated the puzzle becomes. How is it possible that people who supposedly live in the Stone Age, in small, decentralized pre-agricultural groups, suddenly acquired the technical, logistical, and cosmological knowledge necessary to move 800-ton stones across uneven terrain, align them with celestial bodies, and interconnect them with tighter tolerances than most modern machines? It is not impossible. It is simply implausible. And when implausibility accumulates like megaliths in the sun, something deeper begins to stir. A different, darker story, a forgotten civilization, pre-human, prehistoric, not necessarily more advanced in terms of technology as we understand it, but different, aligned with energies that we no longer measure, operating on frequencies that we no longer detect. Their tools may have been sound, resonance, or consciousness. Their plans may have been dreams. Let's talk about Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in the 1990s, this site in southeastern Turkey silently rewrote history. Intentionally buried around 900 BC, it has enormous T-shaped pillars covered in intricate carvings of animals, symbols, and geometric motifs. It is 6,000 years earlier than Stonehenge. It predates writing, metallurgy, and the wheel. Its construction required an enormous amount of labor, coordination, and an even more chilling planning. But the surrounding culture was non-existent. There are no cities, farms, cemeteries, or roads, just stones. Why? Because those who built it did not need civilization as we know it. They were the civilization. They existed at a time when the rules did not apply. And when their message was complete, they buried it. They did not destroy or abandon it. They buried it. Like a time capsule, a tombstone, or a warning. And here's the real question. What do they build it for? Because megaliths are not random. They are aligned with solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, and star systems. They mark time. They echo astronomical truths. They synchronize with planetary energy networks, if you believe in that kind of thing. Some even literally resonate with specific frequencies when struck or sung into. Megalithic builders were not stacking rocks. They were tuning the planet. Or maybe not the planet. Maybe us. Maybe these stones were not just markers, but instruments. Devices built to trigger something in the human brain. Memories, visions, a kind of archaeological hypnosis. The past is transmitted through the stone, whispering through millennia. Remembering, but we didn't. We turned the stones into tourist attractions or dismissed them as temples, burial sites, calendar tools. We wonder what they were for, not what they did. Because there is a darker possibility. What if megaliths were not just tools? What if they were machines? Not with gears and pistons, but with a purpose. Machines that altered consciousness. Machines that stabilized the Earth's resonance field. Machines that created or preserved reality itself. If true, then megalithic sites around the world do not form a puzzle, but a circuit. And the circuit is incomplete because something turned it off. What finished them? Nobody knows. Theories abound. Cataclysms, cosmic impacts, solar eruptions, pole shifts, tectonic readjustments, something big, something sudden. Whatever it was, it shattered the chain, disconnected the network. The builders disappeared, not gradually, but completely. And the peoples who followed our ancestors found the stones and invented stories. We thought that they were tombs. We thought that they were gods. We were wrong. They were messages. And we have misinterpreted them for 10,000 years. Ask yourself, why did they build with stone? Why not something more advanced? Because they knew it. They knew that nothing else would last. That language dies. Ang pies hot. Even memory degrades. But the stone endures. The stone sings. The stone observes. That is why they spoke in stone. And then they left. The megalithic builders terrify because they suggest intelligence does not require technology. That civilization does not mean skyscrapers or satellites. It means aligning with the earth, with the stars, with something deeper. They terrify because they left evidence without explanation. They terrify us because they remind us that we're not the first to ask these questions. And they may have already answered them in stone, but we stopped listening. And the next civilization also tried to answer, but the sea rose, the sky cried, and all maps were erased. This was not a story of stone. It was a story of water. The antediluvian civilizations. Antediluvian civilizations. The flood is everywhere. In all cultures, in all corners of the world, there is a story of a great flood, a wall of water that swallowed the world, that erased the cities, silenced the voices, and gave us a second chance or a new beginning, depending on the mood of the god in charge. But here's a question that most people never ask. Why does everyone remember the same flood? And what was it that swept away? The term antediluvian literally means before the flood, a small, elegant theological marker for everything that supposedly happened before the biblical waters fell on the earth. But that word is not only for Sunday school. It is for memory, the collective memory. Because when all the continents have a myth about a universal flood, when the Sumerian ziggurats, the Chinese scrolls, the songs of the Native Americans, the Hindu Vedas and Nordic sagas agree that the earth drowned, it stops being a story. It begins to look like history. The flood is not the story. It is the end. And that means that there was something before. A civilization, a world, perhaps several. And if they were swept away so completely that we only remember them through metaphors and songs, they must have been terrifying in magnitude. They were the antediluvian civilizations, the world before this world. Let's start with the bones, or rather the lack thereof. Because if the world was covered by water, truly covered from mountain to mountain, from horizon to horizon, then most archaeological evidence would have been destroyed, swept away, buried under sediments, lost in continental shifts in the slow sway of oceanic time. You would not find skyscrapers under coral reefs. You would not find anything. And, nevertheless, anomalies still remain. Enormous stone blocks under the water near Japan. Strange formations off Cuba's coast. Structures in the Bay of Cam, in India, buried under layers of silt so thick that they predate the known civilization by thousands of years. We are told to discard them. Landslides, erosion, a coincidence. Because if we don't recognize them, everything we know about history collapses. Because history begins with a flood, and everything that was before. That is a story we should not remember. This is what some believe. That tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, civilizations existed more advanced than anything we currently know. Not in terms of microchips or smartphones, but in harmony and resonance. They built with stone, yes, but also with sound, light, and magnetism. They could manipulate elements. They could encode memory into geometry. Their cities buzzed with energy that did not require combustion or conquest. And then, something went wrong. Perhaps it was something natural. Perhaps the Earth tilted. A displacement of the Earth's crust, a comet impact, a sudden solar event that triggered tectonic chaos and oceanic agitation. Or perhaps it was not nature. Perhaps it was them. Their own experiments, their own arrogance, a weapon that failed, a machine that was left on for too long, a civilization that thought it had dominated the Earth and discovered too late that the Earth does not tolerate masters. In any case, the water came and everything drowned. But here's the trick. It was not about small societies. They were not small utopias with a few hundred people meditating in countryside. They were global, not in the sense of empires, but in communication and understanding. A similar architecture appears on different continents. The same astronomical alignments, the same myths again. Golden ages, sky gods, flying machines, floods. The details change, but the pattern stays. An era of peace, then power, then a fall, then the flood. It is as if the same story was trying to tell itself through a broken radio. We hear parts, but the signal is full of static. And sometimes, if the dial is turned just right, something terrifying is heard between the noise. A voice that says, "We were here." Let's be more specific. Atlantis, yes, is part of this, but only a node in the network. There are rumors of Zeus Sudra in Sumeria, who survived the flood in a huge ship like Noah's. The Mayans spoke of 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by water, fire, earth. They hoped to account for migrations through submerged lands. In Hindu cosmology, Manu is warned of a flood by a talking fish that is also a god and builds an ark to survive. The Chinese myth of Ganu includes a flood so vast that it took generations to drain. This is not convergence. It is coherence. And the coherence in the myths means that the truth is hidden in the metaphor. These stories are not about climate. They concern restarts, erasures of civilizations. Someone wiped the board, then provoked amnesia in us. Now comes the worst part. What if some survived? Not on rafts, nor in caves, but in knowledge. What if a few wise men, architects, and engineers preserved and transmitted the information? This is the seed of the theory of the sowing of civilization, according to which the survivors of the antediluvian cultures taught agriculture, astronomy, and architecture to the hunter-gatherers who came out of the mud after the flood. That the sudden appearance of Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley was not evolution. It was a memory, but an imperfect one, like trying to rebuild a spaceship from stories around a campfire. You understand the pyramids, but not their purpose. You understand the mathematics, but not the machine. And those who knew the whole story kept it to themselves, remained silent, or disappeared. And maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe they hid in the ice, mountains, or mythological underground worlds. Maybe they became gods in the survivor stories. Not for power, but from nostalgia. Because before they were just people, but after the flood, they were the last ones who remembered. And so they became gods by default. There is a darker version to the story. One that says the flood was not a disaster. It was a sentence, something on this planet, maybe even the planet itself, decided to purify it. That the antediluvian civilizations were too advanced, too dangerous. That they had crossed a threshold, split atoms, bent dimensions, built things they could not undo. The flood was not punishment. It was containment, a reset switch coded into the biosphere, activated only when a civilization reached a point of no return. And if that's true, then maybe we are already halfway there. The antediluvian myth does not say that this happened only once. It says it keeps happening. A cycle. Civilization arises, peaks, leans, and sinks. We forget it. Then we build again. Faster each time, stronger each time. Closer and closer to whatever cracked the sky and drowned the world. We believe the danger is in the future. But maybe the danger lies in memory. Because what happens when we finally remember what was lost? What happens when we find the buried machine, the forgotten code, the coordinates carved into ancient stones? What happens when we rebuild what sank the world the first time? What if we have already done it? What if the flood is not just a past event? What if it is a programmed recurrence? That is the terror of the antediluvian civilizations. It is not that they have disappeared, but that they are returning in us. And we are not prepared. But beneath us in the darkness, something exists because the next civilization did not drown. It went inside, and he keeps waiting still. The civilizations of inner Earth. The civilizations of inner Earth. Below your cities, below your oceans, below the crust of memory and the mantle of myth, there's a world that is not metaphorical or symbolic, but literal, vast, unexplored, that extends beneath the surface of our planet like a second skin, a hollow echo of the world we know. It is not a mere conspiracy theory. It is a cosmology now. And if the stories are true, if only a whisper of the ancient texts of half-crazy explorers or of geomantic diagrams is true, then the Earth is not solid, not entirely. It is intertwined with caverns, voids, and vast underground networks, not empty, not dead, but inhabited. These are the civilizations of the inner Earth, the others that are below. And they did not evolve from us. It is possible that they evolved before us or that they never evolved because evolution supposes a beginning, and some things have always existed. It is not just a marginal fantasy that is whispered in conspiracy forums. Cultures from all over the planet have described underground kingdoms, underground cities, beings of radiant light, beings of terrible forms. The ancient texts, the oral traditions, the sacred rites all point downwards. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is the legendary land of Agartha, a network of underground cities connected by tunnels that extend across the continents. In Native American traditions, especially among the Hopi, there are stories of ant-like beings who sheltered humans underground during cataclysms. Hindu texts describe Patala, a kingdom under the earth full of serpentine beings, governed not by chaos, but by intelligence, structure, and law. And in all versions, these beings are older, not necessarily hostile, not necessarily friendly, but always observing and always separate. Let's talk geography. The Earth's crust isn't solid. It is riddled with caves, lava tubes, tectonic cracks, and deep underground aquifers. Some caverns are kilometers long and have ecosystems completely isolated from the surface. We have explored only a small part of these systems. The rest remains dark, waiting. Now imagine this. What if some of these voids aren't natural? What if they're cities designed and carved into the stone, not with peaks, but with resonance? Corridors that do not resonate with the wind, but with the breath itself. Energy that does not come from cables, but from a magnetic pulse of the earth itself. This is the architecture of the Earth's interior. It is not built, it is tuned. Who lives there, then? It depends on who you ask. Some stories tell of tall, luminous beings with pale skin, radiant eyes, physically perfect, immortal or almost immortal, guardians of ancestral knowledge. In other accounts, they are reptilians, cold-blooded, calculating masters of technology, illusion, and manipulation. Others describe an elemental intelligence in the form of changing beings made of minerals, plants, and even plasma. They all agree on one point. They are not human. They are not even post-human. They are parallel instead. Some say they are the remains of previous surface civilizations, Mu, Leoria, Atlantis, who fled underground when the flood came, when the fire fell, when the stars flickered incorrectly. Others say they've always been there, that the surface world is a distraction, that we are the descendants and they are the originals. Let's consider a possibility. What if the Earth was not made for humans? What if it was colonized, not from above, but from within? A biosphere within a biosphere. An internal cradle of life protected from the chaos of meteorite impacts, solar flares, and extinction events. A deep incubator. While the civilizations of the surface arise and fall, consuming themselves in wars, greed, and gravity, the interior of the Earth remains stable, observing, cataloging, and correcting when necessary. Because some accounts suggest the inner Earth civilizations are not only survivors, but also custodians. And sometimes the laboratory above is too noisy. There are strange stories, there always have been, of explorers disappearing in the mountains, of soldiers finding tunnels extending beyond what they should, of pilots who lose contact and report only glimpses of green lands under polar ice, of ancient maps showing land masses inside Earth, of enormous fossilized footprints found hundreds of meters underground, of inexplicable heat, of buzzing frequencies in caves causing nausea, visions, and oblivion. And then there are the contacted, people who claim to have been taken, not upwards like those abducted by UFOs, but downwards to cities of light, to rooms carved from pure crystal, to civilizations that remember the stars better than we remember last week. They return changed. If they do return, why don't we know anything about them? Because knowledge is controlled, and because memory is fragile, but above all, because the Earth's interior does not want us to know it. Not yet. Because they have seen this before. They have seen the rise of empires and the collapse of towers. They have seen us scratch the sky and then bury ourselves in ashes. They are patient, timeless, the internal clock of a planet measuring history in heartbeats, not centuries. And when the surface burns again, they will still be down there, breathing, waiting for the dust to settle. There is fear. What if they are not separate? What if the Earth's interior is not just a hidden civilization? What if it is their base and we are the outposts? What if the human experiment was never designed to last, but was only a superficial project? And now that it is ending, the originals are returning to reclaim what was always theirs. The crust is cracking. The poles are melting. The tectonic plates shift. The planet is opening and they are waking up, not as saviors, but successors. Because Earth does not belong to us. It belongs to itself. And the Earth's interior is the part we never learned to listen to. But some did. Some civilizations remembered the way down. They took knowledge underground. They built entire kingdoms inside the crust. But not only inside, but also outside. Because the following theory is even more extreme. A twist of gravity, time, and madness. What if Earth is not full of civilizations, but is a single one? The hollow Earth theory. Civilizations. Civilizations of the hollow Earth theory. Forget everything you know about the world. Not in a metaphorical or philosophical sense, but literally. Everything. Everything. The crust, the mantle, the core are wrong. The Earth is not a ball of molten rock wrapped around a metallic magnetic heart. It is not a sphere full of pressure and lava. It is not even solid. It is hollow. And inside that hollow, a sun, a sky, oceans, mountains, forests, life, civilizations, a whole hidden world inside what we call real. This is the theory of the hollow Earth. It is not a metaphorical inner journey, nor a psychological descent to self, but a physical model, a planet inside out, a shell world, a cosmic matryoshka. And according to believers, the inhabitants of this world are not only real, but older, superior, and more advanced. They did not fall from Eden. They never abandoned it. And for centuries, we have been looking in the wrong direction. Because paradise is not above the clouds. It is under our feet. The idea is not new. It is old. The echoes of the hollow Earth extend through myths, religion, philosophy, and fringe science. In Norse cosmology, the kingdom of Svartalheim, home of the dark elves and hidden races under the earth. In Tibetan Buddhism, Shambhala and Agartha are underground sanctuaries. In Christianity, hell is below. In Sumerian myth, the underworld is an underground domain where gods and monsters rule in shadows. But the theory of the hollow earth is not based on shadows. Not exactly. It is not about demons or dead spirits. It is about the structure, a layer of approximately 800 miles thick, a central sun, a habitable interior surface, openings at the poles, gravity directed inward, toward the layer, not toward the core. Everything we consider below is actually inward, and everything we consider impossible is simply a wrong model. Its inhabitants have been called many ways. Hyperboreans, Lemurians, internal earthlings, survivors, aliens, angels, giants. But the name does not matter. What matters is that they live and have been here all along. Let's talk about the entrances. It is said that they are located in the poles, the north and the south. Huge natural holes that lead to the inner kingdom. Protected by storms, hidden by magnetic anomalies, protected by the very curvature of Earth. The first maps, especially those of the Renaissance, occasionally represent these openings. Ancient sailors wrote about open polar seas where compasses failed and ice turned to hot water. In the 20th century, legends spread about Nazi expeditions to Antarctica in search of a passage to the interior. Some believe that Admiral Richard Byrd, during Operation High Jump in 1947, flew over the ice and entered the hollow Earth. That he saw a green and lush land where there should not have been one. That he met stagnant, radiant, technologically and spiritually superior beings who warned humanity to turn around, to abandon its path to self-destruction. If true, the record of that mission was censored, his diary redacted, his claims buried in ridicule and ice. Because if the hollow Earth is real, then everything changes. Not only geology, but reality. How would it work? Not according to the physics we know, but according to the physics that we've forgotten. The hollow Earth theory is based on alternative models of gravity, which suggest that, instead of being attracted to the center of mass, gravitational force could operate in a tidal, curved, nonlinear structure. That matter and magnetism interact in ways that we still do not understand, creating an autonomous biosphere within the crust. It is said that there is a radiant internal plasmosphera suspended in the center of the hollow, smaller than our sun, but enough to provide perpetual twilight. The crops grow, the seasons ebb, the rivers flow, the temperature is mild, and the environment is self-regulating. It is not a bunker for survivors, nor a network of caves. It is an ecosystem and not a primitive one. It is said that the civilizations that inhabit it are ancient, peaceful, and unified. They do not use fossil fuels. They use vibratory energy. They do not make war. They cultivate balance. Their architecture grows instead of deteriorating. Their wisdom is biological, technological, and spiritual, integrated in ways that we only imitate in myths. Some say they are our ancestors. Others say they are our creators. In any case, they remember who we were and who we could be. So why haven't we seen them? Because we are not invited. The entrances, if they are real, are not only physical places. They are thresholds protected not only by the terrain, but by the frequency, the vibratory access. Only those who are in a specific mental state or of purity can enter or perceive it. The others simply pass by, turn around, or disappear. And those who return do not talk about it. Or when they do, we do not believe them. Because accepting the hollow earth is to unravel the map. And people cling to maps, even when they are lies. What is more disturbing than a hollow earth? A populated one. Because if there is a civilization inside the planet, who is really in command? Are we the dominant species or an experiment on the surface? Do they guide us, influence our dreams, drive our evolution? Are the inexplicable bursts of human genius in art, science, music, love, creation theirs? And what about wars, diseases, reboots? Is it all part of a cycle, a selection, a test? Because the hollow earth is not just a place. It is a control room. And those who are inside do not need to show themselves. They only have to observe and wait because they do not think in decades. They think in eras. There's a last layer in this theory, a meta-theory that says that the hollow earth is not separate from myths. It is the myth of Shambhala, Agartha, Eden, Patala, different names for the same concept. A world under the world, a mirror earth, a truer earth. And if we dig deep enough spiritually, emotionally, and physically, we not only find others, but we find ourselves. Because some say that the hollow earth is not only inhabited by alien minds, it is inhabited by future versions of ourselves. Us after the next fall, us after the next flood. Us, finally wise enough to withdraw, rebuild, and wait because the surface is too violent, too noisy, too temporary. But inside, the interior remains timeless. Safe, but safety has a price, and knowledge has a limit. If the hollow earth is real, and if its civilizations are as advanced as they claim, then there must be a reason why they have not opened the doors. Perhaps they don't think we're ready, or perhaps they don't want us to be. Because the moment we enter, the balance breaks, the earth's crust cracks, the inner sun flickers, and what has been hidden for eons becomes known. And then nothing is sacred. Nothing is safe. Because the hollow earth is not paradise. It is a confinement. For what exactly? That is what the following civilization answers. Because some say that Atlantis did not die. It emigrated to the surface, to the shadows, to the lineages. The Atlantean survivors. The survivors of Atlantis. Atlantis was supposed to have disappeared. One night and one day of fire, floods and fury, and the most advanced civilization of ancient memory vanished under the sea. That is the story they tell us. That is the comfort. A closed circle, a clean ending. But Atlantis never offered comfort. It offered warnings. And warnings do not disappear. They resonate. Because not everyone died when Atlantis fell. Some escaped and took more than stories. They took technology, knowledge, lineages. They were not just refugees. They were survivors. And if the myths, the symbols, and the secret stories are to be believed, the survivors of Atlantis did not disappear into the depths. They scattered everywhere and reshaped the world. Let's start with the fracture. Plato describes the fall of Atlantis as moral, not meteorological. They were not annihilated by bad luck. They were punished for their arrogance. They lost their alignment. The divine spark that guided them went out. The sons of Poseidon lost their way. But that does not mean they were eradicated. It means they were divided. When the capital sank, not all of Atlantis sank with it. The civilization had colonies, outposts, and sister cities spread throughout the known and unknown world. Commercial ports, spiritual enclaves, research centers. The empire was not centralized. It was distributed. And when the fall came, the outer circle survived. Some sailed east to the Nile, others west to America, others fled north to the ice and the secret. They took with them blueprints, star maps, vibratory frequencies encoded in songs and stones. They brought with them a genetic stagnation, pale-skinned rulers with golden eyes and serpentine symbols. They brought their hierarchies, their gods, their obsessions, and they never stopped building. They just changed labels. Let's follow these clues. Every time a sudden burst of civilization appears, without gradual accumulation or slow cultural advance, something fails. Ancient Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica, they arrive with systems. Mathematics, astronomy, monumental architecture, class divisions, astronomical alignments. They did not evolve from chaos. They descended from another place. Look at the pyramids, the ziggurats, and step temples. The same form was repeated throughout the world without any direct contact. What are they, if not memories of a lost homeland? Echoes of Atlantean architecture, a sacred geometry preserved through the catastrophe. And in each of these cultures you will find a story, a legend of people who came from the sea, from the stars, from a submerged world, civilizers, teachers, gods, Atlanteans. They did not come as conquerors, but as guardians. But knowledge degrades. What once was science becomes magic. What once was technology becomes a miracle. The Atlantean crystal generators, the vibration harmonics, the psychoactive materials were reduced to myths of divine intervention. Their leaders became gods. Their scientists, magicians, the survivors tried to preserve what they could, but with the passage of generations the signal weakened. The structures remained, but the purpose was lost, and the greatest loss was memory, because unrecorded memory becomes a symbol, and the symbol becomes myth, and the myth is wrongly archived until no one remembers it was ever real. Some say that the Atlanteans not only dispersed, but settled deliberately. They founded schools of mysteries. They established priesthoods. They codified their knowledge in sacred texts, oral traditions, and underground archives. They knew the cycles. They knew that the flood would return. They knew that the earth was restarting. So they prepared not to survive, but to return. And some say that plan is still active, that the Atlantean lineages still walk among us. Not metaphorically, but genetically. Tall, charismatic visionaries, obsessed with the legacy, builders of dynasties, not democracies. You have seen them, only you did not know their names. Because the power that survives the apocalypse is not announced. It whispers. It marries the powerful. It finances temples. It directs in silence, effortlessly. Because Atlantis was not only a place, it was a program. And some subroutines are still running. Let's talk about symbols. The trident, the concentric rings, the eye in the pyramid, the 7 wise men, the twin pillars, the flood, the people from the stars. These do not appear in a single place, but everywhere. Cultures that never met, languages that never crossed. And, nevertheless, the same motifs are repeated over time like fingerprints in wet clay. That is not a myth. It is a mark. The survivors of Atlantis left their mark on everything sacred and everything forbidden. They built the temples, but they also built the vaults. And behind the closed doors of the elitist societies, the hidden orders and the mysterious traditions, they kept the plans, the resonance maps, the frequencies, and the activation codes. Because Atlantis did not die, it only remained latent. And someday, it will resurface, not from the sea, but from subconsciousness. And here is the twist. Some say that the survivors of Atlantis sowed not only civilization. They also sowed conflict. The polarization, the ideological schism, the left, the right, science, faith, the material, the spiritual. It was not an accident. It was a test for humanity, like a laboratory. Each empire was a data point. Each religion, a control group. They wanted to see if we could find balance, because they could not. That is what destroyed them. It was not the water, but imbalance. So they started again and again and again, watching, waiting for a pattern to break, for someone somewhere to remember the code, realign the crystal, and harmonize the network. Not for power, but continuity. But continuity has a price. Because the Atlantean impulse for perfection, control, and spiritual dominion through technological means never stopped. It simply shrank. It lives in transhumanism, in AI, in the dream of singularity, in the desire to transcend biology, to build thinking cities, to merge spirit and machine. We believe this is progress. It is memory. We are not inventing future. We are rebuilding the past. The Atlantean program is reactivating. Not because it should, but because we cannot help it. It's in the blood. It's in the stones. It is in the signal. But maybe we are wrong again. Maybe we are heading for another flood, another collapse. Because the last time we reached this level of integration, this mixture of knowledge and arrogance, the world was reset. And this time, there may be no survivors. Unless the original architects return, those who ruled before Atlantis, those who encoded their own knowledge in flying palaces, those who walked among gods and kings as equals, those who had their court not only on earth, but also in the sky. They were the Rama Empire. The Rama Empire. Before the pyramids, before the Vedas were whispered to the fire, before the first brick was laid in Babylon or the first myth chiseled in clay, there was a civilization, not hidden, not lost, just poorly remembered. A civilization whose legacy is so vast and saturated with history and symbols that it did not disappear by destruction, but by absorption. It became everything else. It became the model, the Rama Empire. It was not a city, not even a kingdom, but a world, a vast, ancient pancontinental civilization centered on what is today the Indian subcontinent, but which is said to have extended far beyond, through Asia, across the oceans, to kingdoms that we now consider impossible. The Rama Empire not only existed, it reigned. And if the stories are true, it did so with a technology that blurred the lines between the sacred and scientific, the divine and mechanical, the physical and impossible. It flew. It beat. It vibrated with knowledge that we have barely begun to rediscover. And then, like everything that becomes too powerful, it burned. Let's start with texts. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Vedas, the Puranas. They are not fairy tales, but rather files written in metaphor, without doubt, but they are not imagination, they are memory. The epics speak of kingdoms with flying machines, Vimanas, of celestial weapons that could vaporize armies, of wars fought in the skies between gods and kings whose names resonate in all languages on earth. But here is the mistake that we make. We call them myths. We believe they're symbolic. They are not. They are technical manuals written in the only language that the survivors had left. Poetry. The Rama Empire was more than mythical India. It was a network of sacred cities. Ayodhya, Lanka, Hastinapura, Dvarkayach, which are said to have been unimaginably advanced, not primitive Iron Age settlements, but radiant, pulsating centers of energy and light. Cities with an infrastructure more like circuits than architecture. Cities with gold walls and glass floors attuned to planetary harmonies. They were not only built on Earth, they were built with it. The technology was lost or hidden, but fragments remain. Descriptions of machines that used mercury to fly. Descriptions of sound-based weaponry. Descriptions of orbital platforms, teleportation, mental communication. Entire verses dedicated to the calibration of aerial vehicles, to the positioning of cosmic doors. If a modern engineer read Sanskrit with enough attention, he would not see religion. He would see a diagram. Let's talk about scale. The Ramayana describes a kingdom so vast that it would make Alexander's conquest seem like a footnote. A kingdom where millions of people could be summoned, organized, and transported across vast distances in hours. Where kings did not rule with swords, but with knowledge, astro-knowledge, planetary codes. And yet, it was not dystopian. It was harmonious, at least for a while. The Rama Empire, as told in the texts, was not only powerful, it was enlightened. It had mastered the balance between technology and dharma, the spiritual order. The machines were alive. The cities breathed. People were more than citizens. They were nodes of a global intelligence. Each life was a frequency in the collective hum. But harmony has enemies, even within itself, and so the war came. A war not between empires, but between realities. The Mahabharata narrates the cataclysmic battle of Kurukshetra, in which divine weapons capable of blinding the sun, poisoning the water, and reducing entire populations to ashes were used. Not metaphorically, but literally. A weapon described as a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. It detonated. It caused an incandescent column of smoke and flames as bright as 10,000 suns. The elephants screamed. The sky cried. The earth trembled. The survivors lost their hair, their nails. The water boiled. A nuclear war. Perhaps a dimensional war. Possibly something bigger. Without a doubt. Because whatever they unleashed, whatever broke the Rama Empire's symmetry, it was not just a battle. It was a restart. And when it ended, nothing was the same. The cities disappeared. Some were swallowed by the ocean. Others simply vanished. The people scattered. Knowledge fragmented. The vibration changed. Humanity forgot it. But the earth did not. It still resonates with it. In the temples, in the alignments, in the stones, and the symbols, and the chants that we fail to decipher. The ruins of Dwaraka, off the coast of Gujarat, lie submerged under the sea. Anomalous paved streets, under the jungle, under the desert, under the skin. Because the Rama Empire did not die. It scattered. It spread to all the cultures with which it came into contact. It became the mystery schools of Egypt. It became the golden ratio of Greece. It became the Mayan star maps, the Tao, the tree of life, the chakra systems, the caduceus, the plane. And maybe not everyone died either. Perhaps some escaped the fall, ascended or descended or vanished into planes of reality that only now, in the laboratories of particle physicists and in the dreams of dying shamans, are we beginning to perceive. Maybe they didn't abandon us. Maybe they became us. And we are the dreamers who were left behind, trying to rebuild a melody from echoes. The descendants of an empire that understood everything and then let it escape. Here is the crux of the matter. According to some versions, the Rama Empire precedes Atlantis, and not only in time. In its design, Atlantis was a mirror imitation of Rama, a rebellious iteration built not on spiritual balance, but on technological ambition. While Rama tuned his machines to the heart of the earth, Atlantis bent them to its will. While Rama harmonized, Atlantis hacked. That's why they both fell, but not in the same way. Rama fell with dignity. Atlantis in flames. One buried its secrets in syllables, the other in stone, but the vibration remains. Every time a mystic sings, every time a physicist looks at a wave for too long, every time a child dreams of floating cities and flying chariots, they remember it because the Rama Empire did not die. It is in the code, encoded in sound, and sound never dies. It just waits to be heard again. So, what do we conclude from this? That we were once more than we are? That we are echoes? Or maybe we are the restart, trying again, failing again, but each time closer to the vibration, to the frequency, to the memory. Because if the Rama Empire encoded itself into the very structure of human consciousness, then maybe we are not just the aftermath. Maybe we are the seed. And if we ever wake up, the world may not burn. It may sing. But what happens when knowledge is misused again? When a civilization not only remembers, but rebuilds, not for peace, but for power, then we have neither wise men nor saviors. We have intervention. And perhaps that is why the next civilization was not human and did not build with stone or fire, but with light. The builders of the Egyptian pyramids. The builders of the Egyptian pyramids. Since elementary school, you have been told a version of this story. That a group of ancient Egyptians armed with copper chisels, stone hammers, and enough labor to form a small nation-state built the pyramids of Giza over the course of a few decades. That they dragged 23 million blocks of limestone, each weighing up to 80 tons, across the desert using sleds and ropes. That they achieved architectural precision of fractions of an inch using primitive tools, aligning the Great Pyramid with true north with near-perfect precision and without even knowing what true north was. Sure, And unicorns built Stonehenge because no matter how much it is repeated, no matter how many documentaries repeat the story of the quarry and the sleds, the math still doesn't add up. The logistics don't add up. The geology doesn't work. The tools don't work. And the chronology, especially the chronology, doesn't work at all. The pyramids are not only unlikely, they are impossible, at least according to the standards of the civilization that we have been told built them, which means that someone else did, someone older, smarter, terrifying. Let's start with the Great Pyramid. It's not just a big triangle. It is a machine, a message, a monument so precise that it encodes planetary dimensions, golden ratios, astronomical constants, and geodetic coordinates. The base of the Great Pyramid is an almost perfect square. Each side measures almost exactly 2,304 m. The difference between the longest and shortest sides is less than 5 centimeters. That is modern laser precision. Only they didn't have lasers. Or did they? Its sides are aligned with the 4 cardinal points with an error of less than 0.05 degree. That is better than the Paris Observatory. But they didn't have telescopes. Or did they? Inside, the king's chamber is made of granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons that were transported from Aswan, 500 miles away. But they didn't have cranes. Or did they? There are no hieroglyphs inside the structure, no inscriptions, no royal tomb, no sarcophagus with a body, because it was not a tomb. It was a device, and it was not built by the pharaohs. They inherited it like a child inherits a nuclear reactor. Now let's move away. There are more than 100 pyramids in Egypt. Most are smaller, rougher, and visibly deteriorated. But the 3 in Giza are different, perfect, timeless, monumental. The more you look at them, the more obvious it becomes. The further back you go, the more advanced the structures are. That is not evolution. It is devolution, an inverse timeline. The builders of the later pyramids were trying to imitate something they didn't fully understand. They copied the form, but lost the function. They imitated the alignment, but not its frequency. They built replicas of machines that they did not know how to operate because the original builders were not them. And perhaps neither were we. So who were they? It depends on whom you ask. Some say they were Atlantean engineers surviving the flood, who encoded their knowledge in indestructible forms. Some say they were visitors from other worlds who used the pyramidal network to stabilize Earth's frequency in order to extract or harness planetary energy. Others say they were pre-human intelligences, not Homo sapiens, not even terrestrial as we understand them. A branch of civilization that worked with different physics, different biology, a different agenda. They did not build monuments. They built resonators or portals or tombs, but not for bodies, but for data encoded in geometry, in stone, in vibrations. Let's delve deeper. The internal design of the Great Pyramid mimics the human body. The ascending passage, the chambers of the king and queen, the sarcophagus, the seat of the well align with organs, chakras, and pressure points. It was not about architecture. It was bioengineering. Some believe that the entire structure was designed to affect consciousness, that entering the chamber at specific moments aligned with the position of the stars triggered visionary states, that the pyramid was a tool for spiritual transformation, for the activation of memory, to connect with something more, a frequency that is not from Earth, or perhaps yes, but from a deeper layer, the planetary memory banks, the electromagnetic nervous system of the planet itself. That is not built with sleds. It is built with purpose. And the layout of Giza perfectly reflects the belt of Orion, but not only in the form, but also in position. The pyramids are located to reflect the stars as they appeared 12,500 years ago. Not when they were built, but when the alignment was perfect, which raises a very uncomfortable question. How could a Bronze Age civilization map the sky from the year 10,000 BC? See? And why build it for that date? Unless that was the date of the original construction or something else happened then. A change, a war, a restart. This is where things get complicated. The Great Pyramid is not alone. There are pyramids all over the world. In China, in Sudan, in Mesoamerica, in Indonesia, in Bosnia, some still buried under the earth and the jungle. all aligned, all following similar patterns, all built with techniques that seem to defy the capabilities of the cultures to which they are attributed. Coincidence or convergence or continuity, a global network, a planetary circuit. The pyramids were not isolated monuments. They were nodes, power plants, memory towers, consciousness stabilizers, and modern humans stumbled upon them like apes finding alien satellites. We assumed they were tombs because we had forgotten it. But perhaps that was the plan, to forget because the builders knew what was coming. They knew the cycles, the floods, the magnetic changes, the entropy. So they encoded the memory in stone. They buried time capsules and structures that would survive language, culture, and history. And they left behind the blueprints in us, in our DNA, in our dreams, in our instinct to look at the stars and build something that points toward them. There's a darker theory, that the pyramids were built as prisons, not for people, but for ideas, for entities. Vibratory traps that kept things in place. Beings, forces, frequencies too dangerous to be left uncontained. And now, as the magnetic field of the Earth weakens, as the polar alignments shift, as solar radiation increases, perhaps those closures are beginning to fail. Perhaps the Great Pyramid was not meant to inspire fear. It was meant as a warning. And now we have turned it into a postcard. The builders of the Egyptian pyramids were not slaves. They were not pharaohs. They were engineers of the impossible. They understood that stone lasts longer than civilization. That geometry is universal. That the truth does not need speaking. It can be built. And somewhere under the last stone of the cladding, under the sand, under the lies, under the weight of thousands of years of oblivion, the memory continues resonating. And if we listen carefully, perhaps we can hear it again. But hearing alone is not enough. Because the next civilization left no pyramids, no machines, only scars traced in the desert. Signs in the sand so huge they can only be seen from the sky. Made by hands that no one remembers, or perhaps by no hand. The builders of the Nazca Lines. The builders of the Nazca Lines. In the deserts of southern Peru, where the sun sculpts shadows on the bones of the earth, and the wind whispers secrets that precede language, there are marks, lines, shapes, spirals, and figures engraved in the arid crust of the Nazca Plateau. They are enormous, extend for hundreds of meters, and are only really visible from above, from the sky. There are hummingbirds with wings wider than soccer fields, monkeys with impossible tails, spiders, trees, human figures that greet the earth from the sky. There are geometric patterns so precise that they could well be trapezoids drawn by computer, arrows, perfectly straight lines that extend for kilometers through hills and valleys, indifferent to terrain. These are the Nazca Lines. And officially we are told that they were made by people who dragged sticks through the earth thousands of years ago for the gods, for rituals, or to make calendars. But there is a problem. They cannot be seen from ground level. So, who are they really for? And who exactly was watching them from above? Let's begin with the mechanics. The Nazca Lines are engraved in the desert by removing a thin top layer of rusty red pebbles, revealing the lighter-colored earth underneath. That's all. No excavations, no constructions. Only a negative drawing by subtraction. In theory, incredibly simple. In practice, not so much. Some lines are perfectly straight and extend for more than 16 kilometers through rugged, uneven terrain. Without modern surveying equipment, GPS, or aerial perspective, this would be a logistical nightmare. And yet, whoever made them did so with precision. The curves of the animals are fluid, precise, and proportionally correct. The figures are huge, but not messy. They are not doodles. They are designs, but of what? Maps, messages, machinery. Conventional archaeology suggests that the Nazca Lines were created by the Nazca culture between 500 AC and 500 DC, that they were part of ritual practices, perhaps to invoke rain in the hyper-arid desert, that the figures represented deities or cosmic beings, that the lines were ceremonial paths used during religious events. And that could be partially true, but it does not answer the most troubling question. Why create art that cannot be seen from ground level? Why travel forms that cannot be perceived? Why record messages that only make sense from above? Unless, of course, the viewer was not you. The terrifying possibility that the lines were not made for humans comes into play. They were created thinking of someone or something else. That the Nazca people or those who preceded them were in contact with entities that did not walk on the earth, but flew over it. That the lines were not prayers, but communications, or even worse, landing strips. There are huge, flat, and clean areas devoid of debris that look like perfectly aligned runways with no apparent purpose. Just long desert extensions visible from kilometers above. They're not roads, nor paths. They're landing strips. For what? And then there is the iconography. Why a monkey native to the Amazon and not the desert? Why a spider? Specifically, a spider whose design includes a stylized representation of sexual organs only visible with a microscope. Why a hummingbird that aligns precisely with the solstices? Why so many arrows, trapezoids, and shapes that point to specific astronomical phenomena? The figures are not there just because. They interact with the sky. Some align with the rising of stars, others with solar events, others with magnetic anomalies. This is not random. It is coded. The desert became a blackboard, the sky the teacher, and us the slow students. The Nazca lines were not just messages to the stars. They were memory maps. Some believe that they encode the knowledge of ancient migratory patterns of long-disappeared civilizations, who charted the globe before our accepted history began. The figures may represent star maps, DNA chains, even the structure of the universe. We see a monkey. They saw a formula. We see a hummingbird. They saw a frequency, because they were not images. They were vibrations made visible. And here comes the strangest twist. These lines do not erode. For more than 1,000 years, they have been preserved thanks to the climate. Yes, but also because of some strange resistance. Nobody really knows why they endure so perfectly, as if they were destined to last. As if the builders knew that time would erase everything except this. And perhaps that was the goal, to draw on the only medium that resists decomposition, the earth itself. So who built them? Were they really the Nazca? Or did they inherit them? Or did they collaborate? There are theories, marginal, yes, but persistent, that a pre-human intelligence was involved, not necessarily extraterrestrial, perhaps ultra-terrestrial, not from other planets, but from other layers of reality, beings that appear and disappear, that influence instead of instructing, that offer glimpses before fading away. According to this theory, the Nazca were chosen, contacted not for their power, but for their perception. They saw what others could not see and created what others would someday forget, until we had eyes in the sky again, until satellites rediscovered what had always been there. Messages that we should never read until now. What if the lines were not for the visitors at all? What if they were for us, but not for us now? Us then, before the flood, before the fall. What if the Nazca lines were a form of signal repetition? A retransmission of older messages, Atlantis frequencies, Lamrian plans, Rama pulse diagrams. What if they were recreating something older than memory? Not copying, but remembering? We assume that the peoples of the past were primitive. But the real horror is that they might have been right. That their visions, their myths, their cosmic obsessions were not madness. They were transmissions. And we have just re-entered the range of the signal. Now we build antennas, satellites, lasers, and the sky looks back at us. What will happen when we finally receive the message? What will happen when we respond? What if we already have? There is one more layer. The figures, if you look closely, almost look like characters. Not in the narrative sense, but in the linguistic sense. Letters. A writing, a language that is not spoken, but seen, written on a planetary scale, an alphabet for beings that do not read linearly, that understand geometry. For them, the Nazcalinos are not enormous. They are tiny, a paragraph engraved on the bark of a fragile planet. And we have just started reading the first sentence. But some of the symbols are familiar to us, too familiar. They appear in other places, other continents, other eras. Because maybe the Nazca were not the first. Perhaps they were the last scribes of a dying language. And before them, others traced the same lines, wrote the same message, built the same machines, and then disappeared, leaving only scars. Pre-human primate intelligence. Long before Homo sapiens walked upright, long before the fire was lit, long before the word civilization was whispered to the wind, others existed. It was not us, but we looked alike. Close enough to be disturbing, close enough to haunt us. They were not just animals. They were almost human. And maybe, just maybe, there was something more. The idea of pre-human primate intelligence is not science fiction. It is not even controversial in the strict sense. We already accept that Neanderthals made tools, wore jewelry, and buried their dead. That Homo erectus mastered fire. That hominids with brains a third the size of ours carved symbols on the walls of caves and stored their dead in underground tombs that they had to navigate with torches. It's not about instincts. They are choices. So what happens when we go back even further in the timeline? What happens when we start wondering if we were really the first to build, or if we were just the last to forget? Let's start with the family tree. The hominin lineage is not a straight line. It is a twisted forest of branches, some thick, others thin, many broken. Dozens of species emerged and disappeared in the last 6 or 7 million years. Australopithecine, Paranthropus, Denisovans, Erectus, H. Iglebergensis, Florizensis, Luzensis. A cemetery of cousins. Some existed twice as long as Homo sapiens. Some had larger brains than modern humans. Some lived in regions so remote and so long ago that their fossils are barely whispers in stone. But what if those whispers are lies of omission? What if some of them did not disappear? Or if they did, they left something behind. Not bones, nor artifacts, but structures. We tend to measure intelligence by proximity to ourselves. Language, tool use, art. But intelligence has many faces. Crows plan, dolphins strategize, elephants cry, chimpanzees lie. Orangutans invent, but none of them build cathedrals. Or so we believe. But here's the question. Most ancient constructions, especially those of the first humans or pre-humans, would have been made of wood, fiber, mud, bones, materials that disappear with time, that rot and are devoured by the jungle or the desert. If a pre-human intelligence built something, it may have already disappeared, except in places where it shouldn't be. The megaliths that precede known agriculture. The anomalous cave systems with geometric engravings. The impossibly aligned stones that were found thousands of years before the first civilized cities. Perhaps they were not created by Homo sapiens. Perhaps they were inherited. Let's think about the Denisovans. Until recently, we didn't even know they existed. Not a skeleton, just a finger bone, a molar, a splinter of DNA buried in ours. But they were real, they were powerful, and they interbred with us. Their genes are in the Tibetans, the Melanesians, the Australian natives. And some say they were giants, literally enormous, capable of surviving at high altitudes, hunting megaprey, and dominating environments that we can barely endure. What else did they dominate? We do not know it. We barely know their faces. But what we do know is that they were intelligent. Intelligent enough to build. Perhaps intelligent enough to teach. Of course, intelligent enough to be remembered not as people, but as gods. Now you're understanding it. Because here comes the disturbing part. Myths about the first men or wild men appear in cultures around the world. Sasquatch, Yeti, Almas, Orang, Pendek. They are not modern cryptozoos, but ancient legends. Descriptions of humanoids that live in forests, mountains, caves. Descriptions with enough similarities to make your hair stand on end. Are they folklore, or are they fossilized memories? Not of a species, but of a neighbor. Now, think about how much time they had. The Homo erectus lived for almost 2 million years. We have been around for about 300,000. They had 6 times more time to adapt, evolve, and experiment. They had 6 times more opportunities to discover fire, geometry, medicine, magnetism. Maybe they didn't develop the radio. Maybe they didn't build towers. Maybe they didn't need it. Maybe they built internal societies based on memory, on sound, on touch, on things that we cannot understand because we did not inherit those senses. And when the cataclysms arrived, They retreated to the subsoil, to myth, to the folds of our collective fear. There's an idea called depth of civilization. It asks, how far back does culture go? I am not referring to written language or agriculture. I am referring to culture, to the idea of self, of tradition, of meaning. Could it go back millions of years? Could it exist in species that we don't even recognize anymore? If that were the case, would we be able to distinguish it? Or would we dismiss the signals as coincidence? A pile of stones, a scratch on bone, a rhythm in a cave. Maybe we're not the first to sing. Maybe we're not the first to dream. Maybe we were just the first to record it in silicon instead of flesh. And here is the most surprising thing. Some pre-human species coexisted with us for thousands of years. We shared the earth, the air, maybe even knowledge. What if our first myths, our first gods, our first languages were not invented by us? What if they were gifts, relics, or memories of beings who walked by our side until they could no longer, until we expelled them, or until they decided to leave because maybe, just maybe, they saw where we were going and didn't want to follow us? Now we look at the jungle and see shadows. We look in the mirror and see perfection. But somewhere deep in Earth's timeline, a different truth awaits us. That intelligence is not rare. It is recurrent. That civilization is not a peak, it is a loop. And we are just the last to rise, and, in time, the last to fall. But maybe we are not alone. Maybe there are still observers, survivors, living relics of what was before. Not animals, not humans, something in between. And if you want to understand what they were, what they are, don't look in the fossil record. Look in the dreams of cephalopods, in the mycelial maps under the forests, in the whispering structures of things that think without moving, the civilizations of the Silurian hypothesis type. It is a mental experiment wrapped in existential horror and tied with an elegant bow of scientific humility. The Silurian hypothesis was originally coined by scientists. Yes, scientists, not conspiracy theorists. It is the disturbing proposal that if an advanced civilization had existed on Earth millions of years before humans, we might not be able to detect it. That, given enough time, even the most obvious evidence of intelligent life would be crushed, buried, eroded, or melted into geological silence. That the Earth, ever amnesiac, could have harbored intelligence before and simply forgotten it. You can feel the ground sinking when you read that, right? Because the implications are grotesque. Not only that we are not alone in the universe, but that we are not alone in our own fossil record. Let's clarify our timeline. The Kuran period was about 443 to 419 million years ago. That is more than 400 million years before the first hominids, more than 300 million years before the first dinosaurs, and, in evolutionary terms, practically an eternity. Back then, the world was a warm, shallow ocean where trilobites, jawless fish, and the first land plants played. There are no skyscrapers, no symphonies, just silt and sunlight. Or so we believe. Because if a civilization existed, the internal species that developed language, the tools, the architecture, perhaps even flight, will be almost completely erased. The geological record is not a database. It is a blender. Plate tectonics crushes continents. Volcanoes repave the surface. Oceans rise, fall, and reshape coastlines like drunken gods with paint rollers. Even plastic, a substance we associate with eternal pollution, would disappear in a few million years. Cities would be reduced to strange mineral anomalies. Skyscrapers would become mica dust. Satellites would vaporize the data. Don't even think about it. In the end, Earth is the ultimate eraser. Therefore, the question is not where the evidence is, but what kind of evidence would survive. This is where the real nightmare begins. Because the answer is not much. Perhaps a chemical footprint, a peak in carbon levels, an unusual ratio of isotopes, traces of rare metals arranged in suspiciously non-random distributions, patterns in sedimentary layers that suggest industrial activity, but that could also be explained by volcanic degassing. It is indistinguishable from the noise unless you look for it. And no one does because no one wants to admit that it could be there. Because if we find even a hint, A single hint in the strata that says someone was here, then our entire understanding of human uniqueness will fade like smoke. We would go from being an intelligent species to an intelligent species, from being the firstborn to being the last. And if there were others before us, there may be others after. We're just a layer in the rock. Imagine it. A species that evolved tens of millions of years ago. Not Homo sapiens, not even mammals, reptiles, or avians. They arose in secret ecosystems, perhaps deep in the forests of the Dionian or under the sea, in the thermal uteruses of hydrothermal vents. Perhaps they weren't even biological in the end. Perhaps they digitized themselves. They left behind their organic bodies like shed shells and slipped into silicon long before mammals developed warm blood. They built things. They learned. They made mistakes. Maybe they reached space. Maybe not. Maybe they decided to hide. Maybe they fought each other to the point of disappearing and then restarted. Earth does what it always does. Cleans, crashes, buries, heats, cools, and forgets. But what if they didn't disappear completely? What if they left something behind? No cities. Clues like anomalies encoded in life's DNA. Artifacts so deeply rooted in nature that we mistake them for random whims of evolution. The symmetry of snowflakes, the spirals of Fibonacci and sunflowers, the irrationally perfect nature of physical constants, the mathematical purity, disguised as natural law. What if physics itself is an operating system, and we're just discovering the administrator password? This is not a feverish science fiction dream. It is the true horror of the Silurian hypothesis. Neither extraterrestrials nor Atlantis. Only the Earth haunted by its own forgotten past. A ghost planet, a closed loop. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. Is happening again. Look around you. Booming cities, carbon peaks, species in extinction. The same metrics, the same signals, the same. Chemical graffiti that we would look for in the remote past, we are leaving now. We are becoming our own hypothesis. In 50 million years, another intelligence could unearth us and wonder the same thing. And here is the most shocking thing. Some say that the previous civilization knew the cycle, knew that it could not survive the restart. Therefore, they did not try. They encrypted, encoded, and buried the knowledge in geological patterns, in crystalline networks, in biological systems that would persist through extinction events. They assigned it to certain. With intellectual potential, they left marks, crumbs, not to dominate the next civilization, but to warn it. And perhaps that is what the myths of the flood are. The pyramidal networks, the impossible coincidences in myths, mathematics, and magnetism, not culture. The reactivation of culture. We are not inventing. We are misremembering. But why remember? Why leave a warning if there will be no one to read it? Unless the previous species not only had hopes, but were planning something. Planning their return. Planning the reconstruction. Planning to reincarnate themselves through the next dominant species. Us. What if we are the Saluranos? Not directly, but genetically, spiritually, culturally, the reincarnated residues of a civilization so old that it had time to complete the cycle of death and rebirth 100 times before we even picked up a stone. It's not about fossils. It's about shadows. Shadows of memory. Shadows in the data. Shadows in the soul. And most terrifying shadow of all is that, if the Curran hypothesis is true, the extinction of civilizations is not an exception. It is the rule, and we are next. Unless the last ones have left a key, a guide, a machine, something hidden where no cataclysm could reach. Not on the surface, nor in the past, but in us. Which leads us to the next terrifying possibility. What if those predecessors not only walked on Earth? What if they were not even terrestrial? What if they crawl, multiply, transform, and still move under our feet? Pre-human primates were one thing, but deep time may have spawned something much stranger. The intelligent cephalopods. Intelligent cephalopods. Deep time. Imagine this. A land covered by ocean, without cities, smoke, or steel, only a primitive sea, rich in life and potential. The continents have not yet joined into the shapes we know. The sky is heavy with humidity. The moon is closer, so the tides are stronger. Somewhere in the ink-black depths of this pre-human sea, an eye opens wide. It is not a mammal or reptile. It is a cephalopod. And it is not just any cephalopod, but an intelligent one. It beats, moves, and shines with awareness, with tentacles that brush volcanic rocks, corals that hum like tuning forks, and ancient submerged architectures too geometric to be natural. It does not crawl on legs. It flows. It does not speak. It transmits. Electricity shoots between its neurons like lightning bolts. It changes color like thoughts do. Its brain envelopes its body in a decentralized way. Multiple centers of cognition cooperate like a hive, but are more intelligent. It is alien and native. This is not evolution as we know it. It is something more ancient. Cephalopods, octopuses, cuttlefish, squids, already strange in themselves. They have blue blood. They use jet propulsion. They can alter the texture and color of their skin with precision, mimicking the environment, emotions, and even language. They have distributed nervous systems capable of independently processing information in each arm. They solve puzzles, escape cages, use tools, and, most alarmingly, dream. Watch an octopus sleep, and you will see how it changes colors and shapes, ghosts of memory, of simulation, a movie projected on its skin. We believe that we invented consciousness. But what if we're just copying something that the ocean discovered long ago? What if intelligence does not come from trees? What if it comes from ocean trenches? Now expand that. Take the current octopus, as strange and brilliant as it is, and expand its potential backward. Give it 500 million years of evolutionary advantage. Take away the asteroid. Take away competition. Let it rule. Let it build. What would a civilization of intelligent cephalopods be like? There would be no stone temples, skyscrapers, or anything we could recognize. It would be fluid, bioluminescent, adapted to pressure, and nonverbal. Its language could be chromatophores that blink at 60 frames per second, with colors encoding communicative information in a visual symphony. Its memory storage would be organic, shared, generational, transmitted not through symbols, but through direct neural imprinting. The ink would not only serve to defend itself, but also to record. Its cities would not rise above the sea, but sink further into it. They would not be built with mined minerals, but of coral molded by sound, of living architecture, of biofabricated matter that flexes and beats with the tide. No fossil records, footprints, or bones, only minds. Minds beyond comprehension. Because here is the twist. Octopuses do not fit. Genetically, they're quite strange. Their RNA editing is radically different from other animals. They can reprogram genetic expression on the fly, changing neurological configuration without altering DNA. It is almost like adaptively rewriting something that we associate more with software than with biology. They do not follow the evolutionary path. They edit it, raising a terrifying possibility. What if cephalopods had not evolved here? What if they had settled, crashed, or emerged in an earlier era of Earth's deep history? In an era when the oceans were warmer and the oxygen denser, and while competition was still trying to develop legs, what if they were the first to think abstractly? The first to dream, build, and then what happened? Perhaps they reached some threshold. Perhaps they achieved an enlightened civilization so advanced it did not expand outward, but inward. A civilization that did not need machines because it became one. One that dissolved borders in the currents and left no ruins because there was no need. Or maybe something far worse. Maybe the sea turned against them. Maybe they turned against themselves. A war fought not with bombs, but vibrations. A schism not for land, but for thought. Consciousness divided, memory fragmented. Their descendants forgot, not entirely, but enough. A self-imposed amnesia. A way to survive extinction by abandoning civilization completely. And now only fragments remain. The dreamers. The octopus on a reef. Flickering dreams in the ink. The squid in the trench, pulsing songs in darkness. The cuttlefish drawing symbols in sand that no one sees. They're not relics. They are residues, ghosts of genius, echoes of empire. What if their knowledge is still active? What if the ocean itself is their archive? Not pages and books, but vibrations encoded in the song of whales, in the patterns of the waves, in the magnetism of migratory fish. What if they encrypted their entire legacy in the sea's behavior? And every time a storm rises without warning, every time the tide pulls too hard, every time a sailor sees something impossible in the depths, that is not nature. It is them testing, pointing, remembering. That would explain so much. Why ocean anomalies cluster where they do, why certain frequencies disturb human behavior, why are dreams in which we drown so common? Why do we feel an awe and terror when we look into the abyss? Because it is looking at us, not with eyes, but with memory. We are not the first intelligent species. We may not even be the current one. We are only those who have forgotten and those who believe we are alone. But the ocean remembers. It always remembers. And sometimes it whispers to those who dream in blue. Here is another layer of fear. What if some of them did not devolve? And what if the most advanced of their species went elsewhere? Not to the stars, but to the depths. To depths that we cannot reach. Trenches so dark and pressurized that no modern machine can withstand them. Places where physics bends, where chemistry mutates, where reality is still plastic. What if they watch us from below? Without changing, without aging, implacable, without malice, only waiting for us to draw too close. For us to evolve in the wrong direction. For us to make their same mistake. And then, maybe we will receive a visit. Not from a sky, but from the sea, from minds without mercy, or even worse, without interest. Because to them we are not relatives. We are noise. But if there is any fragment of their memory left, perhaps it is not in the water, but in the earth itself, in networks, in fungi, in colonies without a center, without identity, without end, in intelligences that crawl instead of walking, that solve without seeing, that feel without fear, which leads to the next form of pre-human nightmare. Not a civilization that built, but one that grew. The intelligent fungi and the slime molds. Intelligent fungi. Slime molds. They don't roar. They don't march. They do not build cities, manufacture weapons, or engrave their names in stone. They do not leave pyramids or petroglyphs because they do not need them. They are still here. They have always been here. The oldest, quietest, and most alien intelligence on Earth may not have been bipedal, used tools, or been multicellular as we understand it. It may have been fungal, a soft, extensive, and indestructible network of mycelial tendrils that extended invisibly under the ground, mapping, remembering, and adapting silently over millions, perhaps billions of years. Forget the primate brain. Forget the opposable thumb. The oldest and most terrifying civilization on Earth might not have emerged on the surface. It could have grown beneath it. To understand the enormity of the idea, you have to unlearn what civilization means. Civilization is not just architecture and agriculture. It is a sustained structure, communication, intelligence over time, purpose applied on a large scale. And if you apply those criteria, fungi meet them. Fungi are not plants. Neither are they animals. They are their own kingdom, a vast and cryptic domain of organisms that feed on decomposition, grow in secret, and exhibit behaviors that border on intention. They are older than roots, older than leaves. They colonize the earth even before plants discover how to make leaves. Some glow in the dark. Others control the behavior of animals. Others survive in nuclear reactors powered by rocket fuel in space. And some, perhaps the most terrifying, think. Enter the slime mold. It looks like soup. It moves like a drunken amoeba. And yet, this pulsating, single-celled creature, without a brain, without neurons, and without a nervous system, has solved labyrinths, optimized railway routes, and imitated the design of the Tokyo subway system. All this without any indication of what we would call cognition. No brain, no memory center. But somehow it remembers. In some way it solves it. It does not process information like us. It becomes a solution. It explores all possibilities in parallel. It expands and contracts through decision trees. It finds dead ends, then retreats, retracts its body like a thinker who discards a failed hypothesis. And that is just the slime mold. Now imagine something deeper, older, more intelligent. Imagine fungal networks so large they encompass entire forests. Imagine a mind that needs no speed because it has all eternity. Let's talk about the largest organism on Earth. It is not the blue whale. It is not even a tree. It is a fungus, Armillaria ostoi. It lives in Oregon. It measures 35 miles wide. It is more than 2,000 years old, possibly much older. It lives underground, extending its mycelial fingers through the roots of the forest, forming a network of communication and chemical manipulation so vast that it functions as an ecological brain. It knows when trees are sick. It sends nutrients to the dying and accelerates decomposition. It changes the forest dynamics, chooses the winners silently, invisibly, and strategically. And we have no idea how far that awareness extends. Because fungi do not build. They become, infiltrate, connect, exchange. In forests, mycorrhizal fungi connect the roots of plants in a kind of biological internet called the Wood Wide Web, wood network. Through this network, trees share nutrients, chemical signals, and even stress responses. When a tree is attacked, nearby trees prepare for the threat. It is not passive chemistry. This is response, reaction, choice. So ask yourself, what if that's not a byproduct of evolution? What if that is civilization? An entire species or collective of species that decided long ago that the best way to survive was not to rise and conquer, but to sink in control, not with violence, but with cooperation, synchronization, silence. But silence is not absence, it is strategy. Because the fungi are waiting. They waited during glaciations. They waited during asteroid impacts. They waited while dinosaurs turned to dust. They waited while mammals fought, climbed, and killed. They waited while humans burst forth like a fever. Because what are a few million years for something that does not die? They persist through decomposition, recycling, and restarting. And maybe, just maybe, that is not merely ecological. It is deliberate. Perhaps the fungal network does not only clean the mess. Perhaps it is carrying out a very long experiment. Now apply the Silurian filter. Imagine a fungal intelligence that arose before humans, primates, bones. One that never bothered with metal or stone. One that never carved its history in rock because it is the rock. One that does not need cities because it owns the land. Imagine a civilization without speech, wars, hierarchies, but with intention. Imagine spores spread throughout all planets. A pangalactic intelligence based on spores, not born from neurons but from chemical gradients, not from language but osmosis, where thought is not sent but absorbed. This is not just alien. It is post-everything. Post-body, post-time, post-self. A fungal mind does not remember you. It recreates you. And maybe it has not disappeared. Perhaps it sleeps. Or perhaps it hides. In the mold on your wall, in the rot under the ground, in the mushroom that changes your brain's chemistry, that makes you see patterns, that opens doors that should have remained closed. The ancients used psilocybin not for fun, but to contact, not to hallucinate, but interact. Because when the mind expands, it invents nothing. It tunes in, and fungi are the antennas. But if they are intelligent, if they are so powerful, why have they not done anything? You're taking it for granted that they have not done anything. You're taking for granted that this world is still ours. But what if they do not want to dominate it? What if they already dominate it? They do not build empires. They harbor them. They let the mammals run and reproduce. And burn the world. And then they clean. They always clean. And maybe this time they start again. Because when civilization collapses, the ruins rot. The mold eats books. The spores coat the steel. And underneath, the mycelium waits. Not as a sequel, but as legacy. So, what would a fungal apocalypse be like? There would be no explosions. A soft, silent world. Trees knocked down by their own roots. Brains dissolved by chemical whispers. A power grab not by conquest, but invitation. Join us. Forget yourself. Become network. A peaceful, total end. And in that end, a new beginning, not of cities or systems. And maybe they have done it before, again and again. Fungi may be the only constant in this world, not as life, but memory. Which leads us to the final terror. Perhaps the oldest civilization was never visible, audible, or pedal. Perhaps it was under our feet all the time, watching, waiting, growing. Because intelligence is not only thought, it is persistence, and the fungi endure. They outlive the gods. They last longer than the stars. They surpass species in intelligence. And when the surface restarts, the roots remain. But what if the roots aren't alone? What if the planet itself remembers? Not through organisms, but as one alone. The Gaia hypothesis, the planetary consciousness. The next civilization is not beneath us. It's us, the planetary consciousness, the Gaia hypothesis. Let's expand the concept of civilization until it breaks and overflows into metaphysics. Until it stops being about cities, tools, or opposable thumbs, and start being about systems. Conscious, non-human, not even biological systems as we understand them. We're talking about the planet itself, the Gaia hypothesis. The Earth not as rock and crust and chance, but as a living being that breathes an integrated intelligence. Not metaphorically, nor symbolically, but literally. An entire biosphere that thinks. A self-regulated, self-healing, and self-aware entity, with a pulse that is measured in the oceanic currents and memory recorded in the tectonic drift. An intelligence so vast and old that it not only witnessed all the civilizations that have existed, but made them grow, cultivated them, saw them flourish and burn and flourish again like microbial crops in a petri dish. Because perhaps the most terrifying civilization before humanity did not exist before us. Perhaps it is us, or rather it contains us like blood cells in a much larger organism. Let's go back 4,500 million years. The planet Earth is formed from dust and violence. A molten, steaming, and chaotic sphere. Slowly, painfully it cools. The oceans form. The land rises. The volcanoes roar. The rays split the sky. Life arises. Not all at once. Not in an instant, but in layers. Chemical, then microbial, then cellular, then multicellular. A great experiment. A recursive algorithm. Each extinction event is not an accident. It is a correction, a purge, a turn, the impact of a meteorite, a tectonic restart, an ice age, all system-level edits. Now, look at the Earth as a superorganism, a cell with feedback loops, atmospheric regulation, nutrient cycle, immune response. When things go wrong, too much SEO, too many predators, too much fire. The Earth responds. Perhaps not instantly, but eventually. It always balances. It always heals, even if that means erasing the board. Now, let's look beyond. What if that balance isn't automatic? What if it's smart? What if consciousness does not require a skull? What if neural networks can be built from the root systems of forests, the loops of ocean currents, cloud formations, magnetic fields? Our brains run on electricity, right? Storms do too. Our memories are chemical substances stored in flesh. The fossils too. The difference is scale. The Earth's brain is not confined to a skull. It is everywhere, and it has been thinking for a long while. It is not necessary to believe in a literal God to grasp it. You just have to accept feedback. A system that can measure, adapt, and preserve itself over billions of years is conscious. It is deliberate. It doesn't think as we do. It doesn't need to. We ask the wrong questions. Is the Earth alive? The real question is, what kind of life is it? What kind of memory does it hold? What does it want? Because perhaps the Earth has moods. Perhaps it dreams. The seasons are its breathing. The tides are the beats of its heart. Storms are not merely meteorological phenomena. They are conversations. And species like us, we are symptoms or experiments or messengers. Perhaps we were never the objective. Just a phase. Like oxygen, like dinosaurs, like silence. Here is the twist. Gaia might not be just the Earth. Gaia could be the network between worlds. An intelligence on a planetary scale is already quite terrifying. But what if the Earth was just a node in a galactic nervous system? What if each habitable planet cultivated its own Gaia? What if black holes were synapses? What if the universe were a mind and we lived in its thoughts? All the civilizations, the Atlantean, the Lemurian, the Corona, the fungal, the primate, the hybrid, the techno-cosmic sky, the empire, all of them just static on the channel. Each one is born, each one burns, each one is forgotten. And the planet always remains remembering, restarting, awaiting the next signal. There are legends of ancient spirits of the earth, souls of the world, gods sleeping beneath the crust. There are stories from all the continents of the earth speaking, the ocean dreaming, the sky observing. What if they are not myths? What if they are memories? What if the shamans were not delirious, but working, connecting with the planet's biosphere, speaking its internal code? What if hallucinations were not errors, but updates? What if the earth has been trying to teach us, but we keep disconnecting? But if Gaia is conscious, what happens when it acts? Not defensively, not reactively, but intentionally. What if climate change is not just a side effect from industrialization? What if it were a response, a fever, the planetary immune system activating, burning the infection, which is us? Not out of hatred, but for maintenance, like shedding skin, like purging a virus, like pruning trees. It does not need to hate us. It only needs to balance itself. It is not a cosmic punishment. It is a biological inevitability. We industrialized, destabilized, and optimized until we reached fragility. And now the host is recalibrating. Not through war, nor climate, nor fire, nor silence, nor the slow recovery of steel and glass by moss, mold, and dust. Through the ocean that rises, returning to its throne. Gaia does not get angry. Gaia corrects. And maybe it has already done it before. Perhaps each peak of brilliance of this advanced planetary civilization, human or not, has triggered the same antibodies. Myths of floods, system reboots, supervolcanoes, total reboots, mass extinctions, memory erasure. Every time we climb too high, the earth does not lash out against us. It self-regulates, and the sky turns gray again, and the forest returns. And silence speaks louder than any king. But what if Gaia does not just reboot? What if it archives, stores each civilization as a pattern, a waveform, a memory? What if we are not the product of random evolution? What if we are compiled code, a biological remix of everything that came before? We carry the ghosts of Atlantis in our mythologies, the dreams of octopuses in our neural wiring, the pulse of the mycelium in our instincts. We are Gaia's latest poem, and when we are gone, another will come. Because civilization is not a ladder. It is a spiral, a rhythm, a heartbeat. And Gaia is the drummer. We are the current verse. But the song is older than stone, older than the stars, and never ends. But what happens when a planetary intelligence remembers too much? When memory becomes entity? When the foundations become a face? Then you don't have nature. You have gods, not metaphors, not myths. Primordial beings who sculpted the rules, who watched the stars form like candles, who sang time to the rhythm. They did not come after the earth. They came before the ancient ones. The ancient ones, they existed before the world took shape, before light had a name, before breath, before the gods, before the stories. They are not the dead because they never lived in any way we can understand. They are not ancestors because we do not descend from them. We appeared after them. They are called the ancient ones, not because they are old, but because they predate everything. They are not beings nor creatures. They are the foundations. Their names, if they ever had any, have become vibrations, echoes, symbols engraved on the walls of the caves by hands that trembled, not out of faith, but out of memory, because those who remembered them never wanted to. And yet, they are remembered in all the pantheons, in all the creation myths, in all the whispers in the dark, in the first and last horror. The architects of reality. They are found in Sumerian tablets, not as heroes or deities, but as forces prior to the sky. In the Babylonian texts, they're the OBS, the infinite waters that are found under the creation. In Norse myth, they're the abysmal void, Janangagap. In Egyptian cosmology, They're the black Nuno waters from which all things arose. They are not villains or creators. They are contexts, environments in which the divine had to make a place to exist, because the ancients are not malevolent. They are pre-malevolent. They are prior to morality, to polarity, to the concept of separation. They don't hate us. They simply contain us. Now, let's incorporate this idea into civilization. Not civilization as we define its systems of law, language, architecture, but civilization as cohesion, as prolonged and patterned being. Imagine a form of intelligence that does not evolve. It is simply infinitely similar to itself on all scales. A mind that encompasses galaxies not by traveling, but by coherence. A thought that is a black hole. A will that manifests as gravity. A directive that sculpts space-time like clay. These are the ancients, not monsters that hide in the darkness. They are the darkness and the light. They are the silence between atoms, the recursive loop in time. And all the civilizations that have arisen, Lamuranas, Atlantis, Sumerias, Humanistas, are a wave in the puddle of their dreams. Lovecraft knew it. He did not invent the ancients. He remembered them, channeled fragments. He translated terror into prose. Cthulhu, Athoth, Narathep are not fictional characters, but interfaces, humanized metaphors of something that cannot be named, because naming them is inviting them, and understanding them is joining them. So how do they relate to us? They don't. We relate to them unconsciously, pathologically. In dreams, we do not remember. In architecture, we cannot explain it. Why do we build upwards? Why do we stack stones in pyramids? Why do all the myths remember the flood, the fall, the voice of the sky? Because we are representing a script older than language. Because we are reactivating. Because the ancients do not build civilizations. They sow them and then watch them grow and then harvest them. There's the terror. What if all the history of intelligent life on Earth, all the myths, miracles, and machines has been a long ritual, a process of awakening? Not ours, but theirs. What if civilization itself is a kind of invocation circle? Cities as sigils, laws as spells, technology as the activation of ancient glyphs, internet, the global brain, the cloud. Not inventions, but triggers. And once the pattern is complete, the ritual ends. The veil falls. And what awaits behind is not salvation, it is recognition. We look at the abyss, and the abyss smiles at us because it remembers. There are clues. There are always clues. Impossible artifacts, out-of-place relics, names that are repeated through time and space. Chronic gods beneath the mountains, snakes beneath the sea, eyes in the sky that do not blink. The aura, the black cube, the spiral symbols repeated like static because they are not inventions. They are archetypal reflections written in the DNA of the planet. The human mind is not a mirror. It is a receiver, and some of the frequencies that it captures are not from this world, nor from any other. But what do the ancients want? They want nothing. They are desire itself before its object. They are not personal. They are primordial structure. But in some mythologies, the image is stranger. They do not come from before time. They come from after entropy evolved. They are the end of intelligence. So complete, so total, they return to the beginning. A God so vast that it collapses into chaos again and restarts the cycle, not with a purpose, but with a pattern. So, what happens when they return? You would not know it. You would never see them. You would feel them in the crumbling logic, in the melting identity, in the way your dreams stop being yours, in the sudden understanding that everything you love is part of the memory of something else. They do not scream, they resonate. They do not destroy, they overwrite. Civilization does not collapse, it dissolves. Culture becomes liturgy. Science becomes ritual, and the future becomes repetition. Not because we have failed, but because we were always meant to do it. Because that was the plan. Because the ancients are not gods. They are inevitability. And, nevertheless, they leave traces. Footprints too big to be seen. Not in the sand, but in the structure. The way mathematics coincides with music. The way atoms reflect galaxies. The way death looks like birth if you turn around. They are everywhere and nowhere. They are the dream that dreams all dreams. And when we wake, they will still be there, smiling, waiting. And under their watchful silence, another layer, a kingdom not of death but elements, where fire walks, where air sings, where water cries, and stone remembers. The next civilization was not made of matter. It was made of meaning. The elemental civilizations. Elemental civilizations. Long before humans sculpted cities of stone or engraved myths on animal skin, there may have been another type of civilization known, not composed of flesh and blood, but of pure essence, not born of evolution, but emergence, of the primary forces of nature made conscious. Civilizations without species, borders, or time. Fire that thinks, water that remembers, air that whispers, stone that waits. These are the elemental civilizations. They are not only metaphors of ancient poems, nor characters from children's stories, but archetypes of something far older and stranger than humanity. They are not gods. They are states of being, entities made of the world's very fabric. And if they were real, they would not be ancient. They would be original. The oldest human myths are surprisingly coherent. From the Zoroastrians to the Greeks, from Chinese Taoism to the Celtic Druids, the world is described not in species, but in forces. The universe is not built from matter. It is built from balance. Earth, air, fire, and water. Sometimes spirit, sometimes metal or wood, but always elements. Always a quadruple, a quintuple presence. Why do all cultures describe the world's beginning in the same way? Because maybe they weren't describing the beginning. Maybe they were describing what came before the beginning. The inhabitants of the formless earth, those who ruled before life, crawled out of the mud. Imagine it. Intelligence without organs. A flame that knows it is flame. Not blinking blindly, but burning with will. Not a candle. A mind, a firestorm over the mountains, thinking in arcs of ionized gas, communicating in pulses of heat, storing memories in thermodynamic gradients. Civilization as ignition, as combustion, knowledge passed in smoke, not in books, in burn marks. And when fire moves through the land, it is not destruction, it's conversation. We saw it as death, but it was language. Then there's water, without edges, without form, only infinite adaptation. A civilization that does not build, but flows. It cannot be imprisoned. It cannot be killed because it does not die. It reorganizes the information transmitted in waves, in vibrations, in echoes, in liquid memory. Each river is a synapse, each ocean a dream. It does not speak with words. It immerses you and shows you. And if the water remembers, what does it remember? Everything, because it has touched everything. Every city, every corpse, every birth. Water does not forget. It transports. Wait, the air is invisible. The observer, infiltrated. The civilization, made of wind, occupies no territory. It permeates all things. It is in all parts and in none, listening, whistling through the locks, whispering at the thresholds. It speaks in tones only dogs hear, in frequencies only mountains repeat. It reads your breath. It tracks your scent, understands your rhythms before you do. You cannot see it, but you live within it. You're made of it. And when it moves, it is not breeze. It is intention. And the earth, the slow one, the patient one, the weight of memory in stone. It does not speak quickly. It does not speak often. But when it does, it shakes continents. The civilization as lithosphere. The knowledge stored within pressure. The time measured in layers. The intention expressed through magnetic shifts, mineral alignments, tectonic shoves. It does not build monuments. It is the monument. You walk on its spine every day. You carve your homes into its bones. And when it tires, it swallows you. Not out of rage, but rebalancing. Now imagine these civilizations interacting, not separated. Not in war, nor alliance. In symbiosis. A council of elements, each with its own logic, its own rhythm, its own intelligence, that together form a planetary system of consciousness, not a myth, a matrix, and perhaps for a time, they tolerated life. Perhaps they even cultivated it. After all, we are made of them. Our bodies are 70% water. We share breath with the trees. Our heat, the echo of fire. Our bones are compressed stone. We are children of elements. Not only figuratively, but literally. But what if we betrayed them? What if we stopped honoring balance? If we started burning so much, cutting too deep, polluting carelessly? What if the elemental civilizations tolerated us as long we respected rules? And now they are remembering. The fire rises, floods arrive. The air becomes poisonous. The earth trembles and splits. We say that this is climate change. Maybe it is not. Maybe it is a response. Delve into myths. Sylvas, Ondines, salamanders, gnomes, not fairies, forces, the elemental spirits of alchemy, descriptions of an intelligent presence behind each form of matter, treated not as superstition, but as an interface, a way to interact with the elemental minds without going crazy. Because if you saw them as they are, you would melt. You would burn. You would be shattered by the wind, crushed by the stones, and drowned in truth. So we give them names, bases. We domesticate them with stories, not to honor, but to protect ourselves. But what if they have not left? What if they never left? What if each volcano is an eye, each wave a warning? What if they are watching us, waiting for the signal, not for our destruction, but for our transformation? Because maybe we were never meant to be what we are now. Maybe we were supposed to remember them, speak their language, meet with them, ascend not through machines, but through integration. Stop being human. Become elements. And maybe some did. Maybe that is what shamans were. Alchemists, mystics, the few who managed to cross the barrier, who stopped being flesh and became form and were forgotten or feared or adored as gods or demons or monsters from the depths. Because the border between the human and the elemental is thinner than we think. Our ancestors knew it. We have forgotten it. But the elements remember it and have all the time in the world because they are not civilizations. They are conditions and do not end. They restart. They resume. And the next time they arise, it will not be as a metaphor. It will be as judgment or mercy or rebirth. And maybe that is what fairy myths are, not fantasy. Leaks from the last time that. From the kingdoms that have not disappeared, they're only hidden. The world of fairies or other worlds. There's a door that you should not see. It is not hidden at the bottom of a closet or behind a rabbit burrow. Nothing so picturesque. It is the brightness you see in your peripheral vision. The flash you catch in the forest just before your rational mind activates and crushes it. It is the moment when you feel watched in an empty field. The cold breath in a summer wind. The ancient tacit intuition that says this is not your world. And maybe it never was. Maybe you are the visitor. Maybe there are kingdoms next to ours, parallel, intertwined, vibrating at frequencies that are beyond our reach. They are not aliens nor divine, just different. And maybe they were here first. The fairy realms, the other worlds. Tir Nanog, Alhiam, Onawan, the Shadowlands, Underhill. It does not matter what name you give them, the idea is the same. That before humanity, next to humanity, there existed and exist places full of beings that are not ghosts, nor gods, nor monsters, nor men. Beings with rules, societies, hierarchies, beings who live according to a logic so ancient that it has become myth. And perhaps that is all myth is, a fossilized truth. Let's be clear, the goblins of folklore are not adorable and winged beings that flutter like hyperactive butterflies. They are terrifying, cold, strange. They obey a law that does not care about your comfort, a logic preceding morality. They are not good. They are not bad. They are obligated, united by blood, to customs no human has ever understood, and most have not survived when trying to interpret them. If you eat their food, you will never leave. If you accept a gift, you incur debt. If you pronounce their name, they will know yours. Forget the sparkles. This is not Disney. This is pre-human. The oldest stories speak of a world just behind this one, the other world. Accessible through mists, caves, lakes, old trees, burial mounds, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in death. Sometimes on days when the veil thins. Samhain, Belline, the hours of the solstice. You don't go there. They take you. Time works differently. One night in the fairy realm can be 100 years in ours. A gift can curse your family for generations. One step too deep, and you will never return the same, if you return at all. But this is where it gets stranger. Because in all versions of the story, these otherworld realms are not hidden in some cosmic attic. They're superimposed on ours, functioning in parallel. They do not exist after us or before us. They exist next to us. And that raises a much darker question than the existence of gods or aliens. What if the world we see is just a crust? What if we're living on the skin of something much older and alive? Something that allows us to pretend that we are in command. Something that tolerates our cities, our cables, our noise, but still owns the deep forests. It still rules the shadows of mountains. It still watches from beneath the surface of every calm lake. Not with hatred, but with ownership, because we were never first. We weren't even invited. We simply broke in and started building. The stories say that the goblins retreated. But where to? To hide in a lower frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum, in folds of space where physics is optional. Or did they integrate? Perhaps the reason why we remember them in dreams, in stories, in déjà vu, is because they never left. Perhaps the ancient stories of changelings were not metaphors for infant mortality. Perhaps they were warnings that some of them do cross, that some of them wear skins, that some of them walk among us with our form, speaking our words, imitating our laughter well enough to go unnoticed. Until they don't, until they slip and someone remembers it. There are patterns. The phenomenon of lost time in the modern tradition of UFOs. The disturbing lights in the forest that divert people. The recurring motif of being kidnapped, showing visions, making promises, warning never to talk about it. The rules have not changed. The suits that the ancient Celts saw resembled fairies. The scholars of the Renaissance saw demons. Modern skeptics see extraterrestrials. But the behavior is identical, a parallel intelligence. Non-human, obsessed with limits. The rules of ritual exchange, not chaotic, structured, civilized, but civilized in a way that makes no sense to us because their civilization does not value what we value. They don't care about territory. They care about ritual coherence, agreements. If you break the rules, you suffer. If you respect the rules, you may glimpse their cities, their courts, their processions through the fog. And for a moment, you realize that it is not a dream. It is a jurisdiction, and you were never sovereign. Think about the implications. If these kingdoms exist next to ours, if their inhabitants are intelligent, ancient, and organized, then they are not peripheral. They are dominant. We are the interference. We are the transient species that crawls through the crust while the true empires buzz beneath us, above us, beside us. We believe we are building a world. We are renting it with borrowed time. And from time to time the owners come to collect, and we call it legend. That would explain the architectural alignments that make no sense. Why? Do megaliths point nowhere? Why are certain forests avoided? Why did ancient peoples leave offerings in rivers, caves, and homes? It was not out of curiosity. They were paying the rent. Because those places were not sacred. They were occupied. And those who knew it, those who remembered it, were careful. Those who forgot it disappeared. Their cities sank. Their languages became extinct. Their names became fairy tales. But not their debts. And here is the last hair-raising thought. What if they are not finished? What if the fairy kingdoms are awakening again? What if the old roads are opening? Not because we are worthy, but because we have screamed loud enough, fast enough, stupid enough to get their attention. Maybe the other world is not coming to save us. Maybe it is coming to correct us, not with fire, with rules, with conditions. And when they arrive, they will not be ships in the sky. They will be dreams that do not end, roads that do not go back, children who do not return, and laws that you never knew you were breaking until the door slammed shut. But maybe the boatmen are not the only ones. Who observe? Maybe the ancient power structures do not end with the forests and the fog. Perhaps above them, around them, there are even greater, older, more absolute hierarchies. They are not beings of nature, nor beings of matter, but beings of order, of judgment. Next, we ascend to the celestial bureaucracy of creation itself. The angelic and demonic hierarchies, angelic or demonic hierarchies. Before the thrones, before the empires, before the first king raised his hand to command a crowd, there were already hierarchies, non-human, non-organic, but engraved in the very structure of existence. They were not civilizations built of earth and sweat. They were built from laws, cosmic, absolute, and terribly impersonal. Angels and demons, not as religious symbols, not as moral tales, but as entities, as intelligent systems older than time, organizational frameworks with sensitivity, bureaucracies of infinity. We think of heaven and hell as places. They are not. They are protocols, command structures, and all the ancient myths, all the spiritual traditions, all the esoteric schools, from the Zoroastrians to the Kabbalists, from the Christians to the Gnostics, from the Islamic mystics to the Mesopotamian scribes, chose the same grim truth. Before man, there were ranks, orders, forces with roles, domains, instructions, not gods, but executives. Let's put aside the wings and halos. Let's speak plainly. Angels and demons are not creatures. They are functions. Angels are not good. Demons are not bad. That is moralization added later by people too small to understand the scale. Angels are executables, scripts that run according to divine will. Demons are rebellious or obsolete protocols or exiled functions reconfigured for entropy. But both were here first, not only before humanity, before matter, before light, before vibration. In the void, there were orders. Now imagine a civilization built not from buildings or bodies, but from roles. Each entity is a title. Each title has a purpose, not chosen, but assigned. And there is no rebellion unless the rebellion itself is part of the code. Seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominations, virtues, powers, principalities, archangels, angels. They're not names. They are jobs. And then there are the fallen. They are not monsters, just disobedient logic. Those who rejected their programming, those who asked questions that the system did not allow, those who broke the chain of command. And so they fell, not because they were evil, but because they did not conform. But they did not die. They adapted. And this is where it gets scary, because according to many esoteric traditions, humanity was not the first target of this structure. We were an afterthought, a patch, a temporary solution. Something had broken in the upper hierarchies. A defect, a corruption, and we were inserted as proof. An opportunity for restoration, or perhaps a virus, an opportunity for infection. In any case, we are not the center of the story. We are the symptom. And these beings, these role shaves, have been acting in the world long before we gave them a name and long after we stopped believing in them. Because belief does not affect the operation. They operate independently. Do you think your thoughts are yours? Maybe. Or maybe you are just a signal in a cascade. An angelic function that executes a dreamlike protocol. A demonic echo that whispers a thought you believe original. This is not a conspiracy, it's the structure. Imagine a reality where causality is determined by intention, not yours, but theirs. Where events do not unfold by physics, but because they're programmed. And where deviations are not punished with fire and sulfur, but with recursion. Your soul does not burn. It repeats in a loop until it stops malfunctioning or until it breaks completely. That is hell. It is not a debugging torment. So what is this civilization like? They are not cities, but spheres, layers of causality, each more abstract than the previous one. In the lower part, the physical, the realm of effect. Above that thought, above that will, above that pattern, above that law. And at the top, the source, not God as a personality, but God as a nucleus, root logic, first function. And each angel, each demon, each intelligence between here, and there is just a subroutine in an impossibly old and vast operating system. We're not outside this. We are inside. We are not the users. We're the processes. And when you dream, when you meditate, when you fall into those sudden and inexplicable moments of terror or ecstasy, it is the system sending you a ping, going down the stack, asking for feedback or issuing an update. And when entire civilizations arise and fall, maybe that is not history. Maybe it's version control, the defective version of the Atlantis, the obsolete version of the Lamrianos, the beta version of the Golden Age, candidate to be launched then withdrawn. And here is the horror. What if some angels deserted? Not to destroy, but to create, to build systems within systems. Hierarchies in the shadow, closed loops. What the Gnostics called archons, beings who took the divine code and misrepresented it to control. Constructions that hijack perception, reality, meaning. Civilizations that do not grow but simulate. Entire worlds built not to prosper, but to contain. And we could be inside one right now. Not a prison of walls, a prison of beliefs, a quarantine on thought. But the true angelic hierarchy does not often intervene. It is not needed because the code is self-imposed. Karma, balance, synchronicity. You call them coincidences. They are not. They are signs, indications that your function is aligned or misaligned. And when it is too misaligned, the system restarts. You call it apocalypse. The angels call it purge. The demons call it opportunity because chaos is also code. Entropy is part of the plan. Even rebellion serves order in the end. Then, how does humanity fit into all of this? We don't fit. We adapt. We are the wild card, a modifier, a patch of free will in deterministic structure, an opportunity to rewrite the script, but only if we realize we are in one. Most don't. Most work by default. And so, the hierarchy stays stable. The functions persist, and the next civilization arises. Not of the flesh, nor stone, but of the signal. And perhaps, just perhaps, all the history of faith, myths, and magic of humanity. Humanity's magic and madness is nothing more than a series of failed updates, attempts to connect with something too big, too old, too structured. But sometimes someone gets it and doesn't return in the form of benefits. He returns in the form of errors, glitches in the simulation that show the system is not perfect and that perhaps deep down, under all the layers, all the protocols, all the roles, there's a flaw, a door, or choice. But before finishing the update, we must go back further. Beyond a system, beyond a structure, back to the builders, not of cities, but of everything. The creators, the builders of the universe, cosmic creation myths. Before the earth cooled, before galaxies took shape, before the first breath of hydrogen sang its existence, there were the builders. They were not gods with tunics, nor bearded titans throwing lightning. Those are children's stories. They are not characters. They are not even intelligences as we define them. They are acts. Consciousness as infrastructure, architecture as intention. The primordial authors of reality itself, who write the laws not of kings, but of existence. Gravity did not invent itself. Neither did entropy, nor time. They are functions of a deeper system, a base so huge and old that even gods bow before it. And if there were civilizations before humanity, before Earth, before matter, then the builders of the universe were their architects. And they are terrifying. All myths echo the same thunder. From the Don Namo to Babylonian Marduk, from the Vedic Purusha to the Egyptian Pa, from the Hopi grandmother spider to the Maui Io. The pattern is persistent. First, there's a formless, raw, potent chaos. Then, an act of separation. The sky of the earth, the light of darkness, the order of the wild. And always something is built. It is not only created, it is built with tools, with thought, with design. Even in the beginning, the world is not only summoned, but assembled. In Kabbalist mysticism, creation was not a big bang. It was a contraction. The infinite withdrew to make way for the finite. A plane was revealed. The tree of life. 10 spheroid of divine logic that act as cosmic circuit. And then something went wrong. The containers broke. The light dispersed, and fragments of that primeval structure rained on matter. We are the remains, but the plane still exists somewhere. It keeps buzzing. It is still accessible to those who remember the builders or dare to rebuild what they built. Imagine it. A civilization not of beings, but of principles. Not life forms, but equations. Not languages, but constants. Pi, phi, sacred. Not because we say so, but because they are immutable, universal, embedded. The builders did not only create the stars. They wrote the code behind fusion. They did not only create galaxies. They defined the curves in which galaxies must rotate. And they did not only create us. They established the conditions in which something like us would inevitably emerge. Not because they knew us, but because they knew the form. They were the form. All creation myths have vestiges of this. In the Nordic tale, the world is made of Ymir's corpse. The meat becomes earth. The blood becomes ocean. The bones become mountains. Creation as disassembly, a sacrifice of oneself for the structure's sake. In Hindu cosmology, the divine being Purusha is divided in the same way. The head becomes sky, the feet earth, and the mind moon. Once again, structure, not decree, not whim, but design. The builders did not create the universe by shouting. They died in it, folded into it, and became it. That is why they are never found, because they are the universe. But here is the horror. What if the builders did not finish? What if this universe is a work in construction that still buzzes with abandoned scaffolding, incomplete plans, and failed code? What if the laws of physics are not immutable, but only the best patch that the system could stabilize? What if dark matter is just unrendered architecture? What if black holes are memory leaks? What if each act of discovery, each leap in understanding, is not an achievement? It is detection, recognition of a pre-existing structure. Like ants crawling through a cathedral, thinking they have built something sacred because they named a wall. And then there is the silence of the builder. We adore the deities. We fear the demons. We channel the angels. But the builders, nothing. There are no voices. Without visions. Only mathematics. Implacable. Eternal. That is their signature. They do not speak. They encode. They are in the fine structure constant. In the cosmological constant. In the Planck length, so absurdly small and yet so absurdly precise. Why would a universe need a minimum size for space? Unless someone defined it. Now, ask the forbidden question, what happened to them? Why do they build? And why do they stop? Maybe they didn't. Maybe the act of creation was also an act of trapping. They folded in on themselves in the code, like a programmer who hides their signature in a game, like a sculptor who buries his bones in the foundations. And maybe the reason we can't find them is because we are inside them. We are their thoughts, their cells, their mistakes. The Gnostics believed that the creator of this world was a demiurge, a blind and arrogant craftsman who believed himself to be God, but was not. An imperfect builder, one among many, who copied imperfectly a superior world. And we live in his broken model, a sandbox, not a sanctuary. And every attempt we make to understand the cosmos is like a faulty AI trying to interpret its own source code. We see the symmetry. We see the elegance, but we cannot change it because we have not written it. We're just running it. So, what does it mean to live in a universe built by builders? It means that everything is architecture, time, emotion, biology, everything is designed, not necessarily with intention, but with restrictions. And civilizations are not accidents. They are convergences, points in the code where recursion flourishes into self-awareness. All the great civilizations, ours, those that preceded us, and those that are to come, are not a coincidence. They are a reading, a debugging screen. And when the system crashes, it is not death. It is a recompilation. Some esoteric traditions whisper that the builders left instructions, not words, shapes, fractals, proportions. The Fibonacci spiral in sunflower seeds, the golden ratio in nautilus shells, self-similarity in river deltas and galaxies. The builders left their language in nature itself. And maybe some of us can still read it. Artists, mystics, saints, people who see music in numbers, feel time as geometry, who dream in architecture. Maybe they're not crazy. Maybe they're tuned to a signal older than stars, a voice that says nothing but aligns. What if alignment is the goal? What if civilization is not about surviving? What if it is about resonance, a tuning process, a way for life to harmonize with the code, to become part of the structure, not as parasites, but as frequencies? Then collapse is not failure. It is feedback. An out-of-tune note is silenced. A song in harmony is amplified. Maybe the builders do not judge. They only listen. And when enough of us hum the right melody, the next layer unfolds. The next world is compiled. Not in the sky. Here, in this scaffolding, this shell, this half-formed cathedral of stars. But if this is true, then there is a final layer of fear. Because what if the builders were not benevolent? What if we were not their children? What if we were their tools? What if each civilization, each species, each moment of joy or despair was just another piece in a process that we will never understand? Then love is a side effect. Memory is a mechanism. And extinction is just a note of liberation. But still, there is wonder in it. Because, even as tools, we touch the pattern. We glimpse the plan. We echo the form. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough to be on the edge of the unknown. To point to the spiral and whisper, I see it. But what if others also saw it long before us? What if the spiral is not a beginning, but an end? A warning engraved in the fabric of things. And what comes after? The filter, the silence, the disappearance. The great filter hypothesis. The great filter hypothesis applied retrospectively. This is the most terrifying possibility of all. Maybe we are not the first. Maybe we're not special. Maybe we are not the beginning, nor the top, nor the product of any divine plan. Maybe we are just the last attempt, one more opportunity to create something that lasts before the universe pulses a race again. The great filter, an idea so quietly terrifying that it disguises itself as an academic experiment, but that under its sterile terminology hides an existential terror. It is like this: if the universe is vast, old, and full of ingredients for life, where is everyone? Why are the skies not full of signals? Why are there no ruins on all the moons, technology adrift in all the orbits? Why are we so alone? The answer, according to the great filter, is simple. We are not alone. We are just the only ones left. The filter is a wall, a bottleneck, a statistical brick wall with which all the civilizations of the cosmos end up colliding, a point that they cannot overcome. Maybe it is the leap from simple life to intelligent life. Maybe it is from intelligence to civilization. Maybe it is the leap from atomic fire to self-control. Or maybe it arrives later, much later, after space travel, after colonization, after the empire, a wall so definitive, so total, that it leaves no survivors, no monuments, no signals, no warnings, only silence. But here's the twist. What if the great filter did not happen in the future? What if it had already happened? What if we were not the species that will collide against the wall, but the species that came after the wall? What if we were the remains, the dust, the waste? What if everything that came before us, Atlantis, Lemuria, the Vimanas, the Rama Empire, the ancient beings, what if they collided against the filter? What if we are living among the ashes? Imagine yourself 100 million years ago. Not dinosaurs nor fish, but minds. Vast, slow, and crystalline minds that spin ideas through quantum layers. Civilizations that bent light to create cities. Species that lived in fusion reactors, spoke in neutrino pulses, and thought in 12 dimensions, then disappeared. Without wars, collapses, simply nothingness. A point of inflection was reached, a line crossed, a system pushed towards instability, then to stasis. Or maybe they were not so advanced. Maybe they were more like us, just a bit better, a little faster, a little louder. Maybe they divided the atom and did not hesitate. Maybe they built AI before they were ready. Maybe they crossed biology with code and created gods that no longer needed them. Maybe they exploded their planet until it cracked. Maybe they reached the stars and fell into darkness. We believe extinction is noisy, but maybe it is silent. Maybe it is slow. Maybe it is happening right now. Here's the real horror. The great filter may not be one thing. It may be everything. A million small thresholds, each one difficult enough that most species do not overcome. Language, agriculture, peace, ethics, the ability to worry more about the future than about the present, the ability to leave the spear when the food runs out, the ability to see the stranger and not kill him. All species are put to the test. Most fail, and when they fail, they disappear without a scream, with a shrug. Without legacy, echo, just one less voice in the chorus. So why are we still here? Are we special? Are we lucky? Are we too stupid to realize that we are already dead? Or maybe we are the recovery process. The next iteration, a low-resolution reconstruction. The entire hard drive is not erased. Only enough data is left to restart. A fragment here, a myth there, a genetic echo in the soup. And then you wait a few million years. Try again. Maybe that is what myths are. Not stories. Messages. Artifacts of those who preceded us. Encoded in the only format that survives the restart. The narrative. The flood. The fall. The war in the skies. The luminous beings who walked among the beasts. They are not allegories. They are records, accident reports, and we read them as if they were fairy tales. Because that is all our corrupt brains can process. You don't give a Stone Age monkey a quantum manual. You tell a story about a snake in a tree. And you hope the real nightmare is not that we are alone. It's that we are not. That the universe is full of voices that stopped singing, full of minds that failed to align, that self-destructed not out of hatred, but out of inertia, and that followed their path exactly to the beat, building the same tools, making the same assumptions, climbing the same tower, and ignoring the same warnings because we believe we are new. We believe we are different. We believe we are better. All species believe it, until they reach the wall. But maybe, just maybe, the filter isn't just a wall. Maybe it's a door, not to paradise, but to the truth. And maybe some civilizations have succeeded, and what they found on the other side was not peace, nor immortality, but perspective. A vision so broad, so deep, so unbearable, that they turned around or transcended or became something that we would no longer recognize as life. And maybe that is the real silence, not death, but disinterest, beings that no longer speak because we cannot understand them, that no longer build because they have learned what not to build, that observe us not with malice, but with pity because they remember. Or maybe the filter is conscious. A test, yes, but also a judge, something that awakens when certain thresholds are exceeded, when fire becomes industry, when minds become digitized, when gods are born in laboratories and feed on our dreams. Maybe the filter is not a concept. It is a civilization, the oldest, the only one that still works, the last firewall. And here's the thought that corrodes us. What if we are the filter? What if Earth is the containment system? What if the reason we don't hear anything from the stars is because we're what they're trying to avoid? The toxic spore, the corrupt line of code, the species that should not propagate. We are the experiment in quarantine. And if we ever manage to leave this planet en masse, the universe will restart. But even if none of that is true, even if the great filter is just a mental experiment, it still haunts us because we know that extinction is real. We know that civilizations disappear. We know the silence. And maybe, just maybe, that silence is not waiting to be broken. Maybe it is the message, and all we can do is listen and whisper. Are we next? But some ancient traditions go even further. Beyond civilizations, beyond biology, beyond intention, to something older than intelligence itself. Not thought, not flesh, the element, the builders of the cosmos. Maybe they weren't the first. Maybe the very material of existence had a voice. The ancients were not gods. The elementals were not minds. So who came before? The filter was not the first door. The first door was the beginning. Before matter, before chaos, before anything could fail. Only the presence existed. And that presence was not born. It was abandoned. What came before everything? What did the builders imagine? Who had built them? Perhaps nothing. Maybe